This is Atomic Shinobi and today I'm going to narrate second and final part of What If Naruto Was the Strongest Devil in the Hell. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no time, let's start the story.
Looking to Kushina, he sighed. It is of no trouble no demon would dare come to this volcano, and besides the level of Yukai that is going to be used here will vaporize many lower level demons. He said, to which she nodded in understanding. Before they walked out of the entrance to the cavern before looking down to continue watching the fight, being aware that the battle would be extremely stressful. With Mito and Akemi skidding on the mountainside, Akemi snarled before she looked up to see Mito coming down like a missile. Reacting quickly, she crouched before jumping away. As she did, Mito practically slammed right into the mountainside, making the area shake as a pillar of smoke shot into the air. It quickly disappeared, showing Mito crouching on the ground, her fist implanted into the ground, a crater all around formed by her fist. When she snapped her eyes to Akemi, they glared as did her own crimson ones. After that, they both vanished and then resurfaced in the air, clashing, sending tiny shockwaves out of them that caused the ground to crack and shatter, boulders to explode, and dead trees to be uprooted. Mito quickly put an end to it by punching Akemi in the stomach and then spinning her head into the ground, causing yet another crater. Mito continued to prepare her hands and bounded down toward Akemi. Her eyes only slightly widened when she saw Akemi snatching Yukai into her claws after the smoke had cleared. Akemi focused her Yukai into her claws while glaring at her approaching target. Then she yelled, "Kitsu no ni no Sume," before she could swing both of her arms toward Mito and make them shoot toward her like a speeding missile. Both of her claws were soon engulfed in a crimson fire shaped claw, Fox Demon Claw. When Mito saw them approaching, he muttered a curse and swiftly dodged the burning claws. Getting irritated with her maneuvering, Akemi moved them once more onto Mito, which she dodged once more, only to the Uzumaki's surprise another pair of flaming claws shoot out of the first pair, which soon grasped her body in a dual grip. And with a grin, swung her arms down, which the flaming claws soon followed. "Take this, Mito." A medium-sized ravine appeared as she screamed and slammed the Devil Empress into the ground, splitting it like a small earthquake. Another crater appeared, but this time, as Akemi stared into the smoke, she felt her fire claws begin to turn gray. Her eyes widened, and she immediately stopped using the technique. Good thing she did, because once she did, the fire-engulfed claws soon became nothing but stone, which soon cracked and shattered, turning to dust that flowed in the wind. "That was excellent. Keep going now." The words that were whispered into her ear were. She spun around quickly enough to avoid or protect herself from the blow that was aimed at her face, causing it to collapse. The Biju gasped and coughed up blood as Mito continued to slam her other hand into Akemi's stomach. Without pausing, Mito seized Kyubi by one of her tails and swung her around before launching her missile through and colliding with a few dead trees. Since Akemi was now inside the forest of dead trees, she quickly followed. Through it all, Naruto's scanning, calculating eyes moved from one end to another, watching the fight with a calculative eye. With a hand on a tree to catch her breath, Akemi panted in the forest, her hair falling over her eyes. Her thoughts were constantly racing about how to defeat Mito, who she knew was far more powerful than she was. "But I'm not giving up. His lordship is giving me another chance. I really did mean it when I said I would stop at nothing." With a renewed vigor, Akemi narrowed her eyes before twisting around, blocking a kick from Mito. She stood her ground, but the ground behind her didn't, for it uprooted behind her, shattering and cracking. She grabbed Mito's foot, swung her up, and slammed her into the ground as her long, blood-red hair billowed in the wind. She didn't stop there. After dropping her leg, she grabbed her head and began repeatedly hitting her face into the ground, creating a larger crater each time. After she was finished, Akemi grabbed Mito by the neck and heard a series of banging noises coming from inside the forest. However, she was swatted away when a visibly unharmed Mito grabbed her arm, dragged her to herself, kneed her in the chest, and then slammed her fist into her face, sending her hurtling through a few more trees. Mito raised both of her hands as she did so and said, "Take this. Herafaya, Fiasuda Mu, Hellfire, Firestorm," before abruptly raising her arms in the air and launching several orbs of hellfire around the tiny space where Akemi was. She glared at the struggling Akemi as she did so, saying, "If you don't want to die, then I suggest you get up," before lowering her arms, which the orbs somehow followed. With no other option, Akemi gritted her teeth and then ejected her Yukai outward, encircling her body in a sphere of blood-red Yukai as they suddenly shot down toward her. She hoped it would hold up well. Boom. Everything in its path was destroyed when a sphere of hellfire erupted from the forest. The chaotic winds and shockwaves from the attack caused the ground to tremble and crack as they passed by Naruto and Kushina, who did little more than ruffle their hair. While Kushina gave a brief thank you for Naruki's absence at the moment, all of their attention was fixed on the battle. It was shrewd of her to condense her yokai into a barrier that protected her. Kushina said, it was a good plan, to which Naruto simply grunted. It wasn't enough. His words flowing in the chaotic winds of the aftermath shockwave, but his eyes were now showing a flicker of interest. Forest. Crater within the giant crater that still had smoke rising from within was Mito standing there impassive as ever, her kimono billowing slightly in the wind. Her eyes, which were partially obscured by her hair, continued to glare down at the smoking form at her feet. Akemi was on the ground. She wasn't dead, but she wasn't okay either. Her kimono was severely burned, exposing a large portion of her body, and she had minor burns on her body. Portions of her black silk bra and underwear, but nothing is visible. Her face though showed frustration above all. Gosh, I'm not going to lose here, no, I won't, not wanting to waste this final opportunity at life, she said. More than anything, she longed for a life. Mito simply sighed as he looked down at Akemi. To impress the master, Akemi, you must perform far better than that, otherwise you will perish here, she said. As Akemi considered what Mito had said, she appeared to stop struggling. She is correct. I haven't done anything wrong, she hasn't been hurt, I've been acting rationally. I don't want to lose here. I want to make amends. I want to win this. I want to get his lordship's attention. Akemi's eyes soon snapped open as her crimson eyes soon glowed pure blood red. An animalistic growl escaped her throat. Her eyes were glaring into Mito's own purple ones before she clawed at the ground. Akemi then snapped to her feet, her features becoming more animalistic as her tails began to slowly wave around her. Mito grinned slightly as he knelt down on all fours. Good, you're getting serious. Then show us what you have, Kyuubi no Kitsune. With Akemi rocketed toward Mito in a much faster speed, making Mito's eyes widen slightly. She didn't have time to put up a guard as a clawed hand rammed onto the side of her head. Her eyes widened slightly before her face struck the ground again, only this time the impact caused the ground to explode. When she looked up for a moment, she saw Akemi's face, her crimson-slitted eyes flashing and growling like the demonic fox she truly was. Before it disappeared, she smiled. She then kicked Akemi away from her, launching the biju into the air, where she quickly flipped it. Mito cracked her fingers and stood up, then spoke. Her demonic voice carried a softer tone as she said, "Good, come at me, Akemi. Show Master your resolve. Show him your will to get stronger and make up for your mistakes." With that, two shot toward each other. They both spoke in their own demonic tones as their demonic aura flared from them, destroying the ground around them or distorting the air in Akemi's case. Heru. Barajengu.ken, Hellfire. Blazing Fist. She uttered as a sphere of hellfire encased her fist and her entire right side was consumed by hellfire, not even burning her, causing a condensed sphere of intensely concentrated hellfire to encircle her fist and her entire arm to flare with hellfire. Akemi also didn't let up, as she directed the majority of her yokai into her left claw, causing it to burst and glow with her crimson flame. Colored yokai. Before discussing her method, she gave a little growl. It quickly developed into a snarling, red-eyed yokai kitsune, with a pure black orb growing larger by the second inside its open maw. Kitsune Sutairu. Kya, Baifuru Kuda Amari. Dama, O.Ju-A-2. Biju Art. Kitsune Style. 9. Tailed full-powered Amari Sphere. Mito's eyes widened at the sound of her words. However, Naruto's own eyes glowed with intense interest and a slight smirk appeared on his face, just like Kushina's. As his hair obscured his eyes from the swaying winds of both techniques, he thought, "Hey, crazy little vixen," and chuckled slightly. Kushina watched the technique until she gave her daughter a tighter hug out of concern that Naruki might be harmed in the aftermath. When Naruto saw how upset she was, he said, "Don't worry, this aftershock won't hurt the child." She instantly relaxed, and the sound of her master's soothing words brought her peace. "Yeah. Naruto. Sama," she said. When Naruto noticed that she was at ease, he glanced back at the two combatants and gave Akemi a look that she might not have noticed. The fact the approval was there showed how much she had already impressed him. Mito, seeing the attack coming at her, pushing her fist toward the attack, knowing the surrounding area was gonna be in great destruction afterwards. How accurate she was. "H-A-A-A-A-A!" Akemi yelled, launching her full force assault at Mito's. As unflappable as ever, the Devil Empress slammed her own attack with the other one. I hoped her master was looking because she could see Akemi's determination. If she was using something like this, boom. A sphere of mixing yokai erupted from the forest, burning everything in its path as an earth. Trembling explosion destroyed everything it touched. It appeared to be a real sphere of fire because it was the color of hellfire blended with crimson yukai. Small mountains were broken by the shockwaves that erupted from the sphere, and Kushina was taken aback by the raging winds that blew past the unyielding Naruto. They did not ruffle their hair, instead, it billowed behind their backs once more. With every passing second, they observed the sphere of death and fire expanding. The clouds in the sky swirled around the massive release of yukai as black lightning raced the sky itself, while the ground was completely burned and tearing itself apart. Before he extended his hand and spoke, Naruto sighed as he saw the sphere approaching the volcano. He said, barrier, as the entire volcano was encased in a massive, invisible barrier. It did its job when the sphere touched the sphere. It completely and utterly halted, not able to move any further. Expectantly, since it didn't go any further, the sphere started to build up more and more into the sky like an oval before Naruto just closed his eyes. Boom. A pillar of smoke rose high above the sky of hell itself as the sphere exploded precisely as it had been intended. The journey through the clouds seemed to go on forever. Knowing that this aftershock would breach the barrier and harm the child, Naruto stood in front of Kushina, knowing that he couldn't allow that to occur. So as the aftershocks blew past him, he continued to gaze down at the now smoke-filled crater with an impassive look that convealed the impressed look within his eyes. That attack Akemi used was actually strong enough to injure one of Lucifer's generals and could quite possibly wipe out a small group of the rebel forces. He was quite surprised at how much Yukai Akemi used, and in such a condensed manner as well. It was much stronger than the other Biju's normal Amari, that was for sure. When the smoke subsided a few minutes later, Naruto and Kushina noticed two shadows inside the crater. Concentrating his gaze on the two, he let out a small smile before he spoke. "Come Kushina, it would seem the fight is over," he said before jumping off the cliff before floating down toward the crater, Kushina following him. Crater within the giant crater, the smoke rose into the air ever so slowly as the remaining yukai in the air seemed to float around like a never-ending fog. The ground was covered in a variety of patterns from the fires of hell. Within the raging aftermath of smoke and fire, was two shadowed forms, one standing, another laying upon the ground. The first was an amazingly unscathed Mito who had not a single scratch upon her flawless body. Her kimono was slightly burned, if anything showing her bare shoulders and more of her toned legs. Everything else was unscathed, but, unlike her, Akemi was much worse off. The nine-tailed Biju was laying upon the ground with severe burns was Akemi. Her body was covered in multiple burns that was already healing but was quite severe. Her body had no clothing since her kimono was all but incinerated in the attack, with only her silk black bra and panties still there, but they themselves were barely hanging. Her eyes were closed, yet her slight breathing showed she was unconscious. Her tails were spread out on the ground, not moving but twitching slightly, and her fox ears were flat on her head. As she took Akemi's hand in her own and spoke, Mito's once impassive face softened into a kind, sisterly one as she knelt down in front of her. She placed a hand on her cheek and smiled at her. Her words poured into the unconscious Kitsune's ears and perhaps into the others as well. "You did great, Akemi-chan. You did absolutely wonderful." When she heard two gentle taps on the floor, she turned to look behind her and saw Kushina grinning broadly while holding a sleeping Naruki. Naruto, meanwhile, was observing her and Akemi with his customary detached look. Before Kushina hurried to her side to see if she was alright, Sei bowed her head to them both. While Mito frantically assured her that everything was fine, Naruto approached the unconscious Biju and stood above her, his eyes displaying an odd expression that did not yet indicate that he intended to kill her. More like the fact he was looking into her very being and analyzing her very soul. The two Uzumakis saw this and waited with bated breath on what their master was gonna do. But the next thing he did shocked them both. He gained a small smirk before speaking. "To use that, and in such a highly condensed manner, you would have died if you were in Ningenkai if you used that. To have overpowered that attack and forcing everything into it. You are crazy, you little vixen." His words carrying a small amount of amusement and humor with each word. He knelt down on his knee and picked up the unconscious Akemi after a few seconds of silence. Carrying her in a bridal carry, he ignored the state of dress she was in and turned toward the surprised Uzumakis. "Purr," was the sound that come from Akemi before she unconsciously snuggled into Naruto, her head rest against his chest, making the devil gain a twitch in his eyebrow. Looking down at her, he half contemplated to just drop her right there and have Mito carry her. "Mito, Kushina, follow me, the woman needs rest," he said before he started to float back up to the cliffside. Kushina and Mito blinked before looking at each other before blinking again. Mito opened her mouth and spoke. "You think," she started, "that he's gonna let her stay?" Kushina concluded. They blinked again, and then their faces lit up with enormous smiles, and they leapt up toward their master, their bodies bursting with joy. Kushina knew her daughter would be even more excited at this. As soon as they arrived at their master, they noticed he had already entered the cavern and promptly followed him. However, once they were with him, they resumed his slow pace. Kushina, the inquisitive redhead, had to ask now. Naruto. Sama. Anyo. The devil just gave her glance which she saw as she had his attention. What are you going to do with Akemi, if I may ask? This earned a sigh from the man, before he kept walking. Well, I'll get right to the point with both you, Kushina and Mito. During the fight, she wasn't moving very quickly. However, she abandoned her rational thinking and succumbed to her demonic instincts even when she was losing. This may be problematic in certain situations, but when a kitsune relies solely on their instincts, they become a far more formidable foe. Prior to this, Kyuubi relied on her mind, which weakened and made it possible for those humans to enslave her. That's not the only reason, but that when you two had that last clash, the power she put into that attack was a great deal of amount. He said, getting both of their attention as they absorbed the information from him. How much was it? This made their master chuckle a little before continuing, but this time in a tone of approval, which was extremely uncommon to hear from him outside of when they were training under him. With all the strength of a 9-tailed Biju included, she forcibly pushed more Yukai into the attack, making it having the amount of Yukai compared to one Kyuubi and one Hachibi. This got gasps from both of them, since they both knew from personal experience that using such levels of Yukai was very deadly to yourself. If you overwork yourself to the point where your reserves are completely depleted and even lower, you may begin to slowly die. Your body would slowly tear itself apart without Yukai to help keep your body be stabilized. How did she have that much Yukai? Kushina asked, her eyes full of wonder and admiration as she looked down at the unconscious kitsune. Naruto just gave her a glance, not breaking pace. Remember about the Yukai gates each demon and devil has? He was given a nod. As they recalled that lesson, the Yukai gates resembled the celestial gates that humans possess, but each time you opened one, you gained 100 times more power and a lot more Yukai. There is said to be 7 in all, named for each sin known to the 3 realms. Their master had released one for demonstration purposes, and when he opened the first gate, the tremendous pressure of the Yukai rushing from their master's body instantly sent them crashing into the ground. His appearance was so terrifying that they were anxious around their master for a good 2 weeks, and they still had nightmares about it. Even now, they would become very anxious if he ever had to release one. Are you implying that Akemi-chan opened a gate? Mito said, to which Naruto just nodded. Yes, from what I saw and felt, Akemi had unintentionally released not 1 but 2 gates worth of Yukai, thus giving her the power of a whole Hachibi after fully powering her attack. He looked down at the sleeping kitsune woman in his arms and remarked, she's lucky to be alive. She flooded the attack with that extra jump start of Yukai just to win. Which has impressed me. His next words made them snap their gaze at him in shock. Sensing this, he elaborated, for her to go to such extremes to prove her worth shows me how much she can keep her word. She hit her limit and went over it all to gain my approval, he said, making a flickering flame of hope come to life within Kushina and Mito's hearts. What does D mean? They both uttered silently, their words filled with such hope it was quite surprising. Naruto just sighed while closing his eyes. Both Kushina and Mito grinned broadly before Mito let out a loud squeal. Yes, she has proven her worth. Starting tomorrow, Kyuubi no Kitsune, or better yet Akemi no Yoko, becomes my new slave. Kushina was unable to do much because she would wake up her sleeping daughter, but she was quietly saying, Databane, while pumping her fist into her daughter's hair. Naruto himself just sighed even more in annoyance, since he could see both Mito and Kushina's actions from even behind himself. Looking down at the woman in his arms, he sighed. Why do I feel like I'll be the center of it all when things are about to get really hectic? 10 minutes later, after following through the cavern, the group of 3 with the sleeping Naruki and unconscious Akemi counting as 2, they had arrived to Kushina and Mito's shock, something that was completely beautiful, in their opinion, for before either eyes, after going through so many channels within the cavern, they had arrived outside the giant volcano, and a house stood before them. What in hell were they thinking? No, it wasn't a house. They were seeing a freaking castle before their very eyes. The castle was enormous and completely dark. However, the surroundings of the castle were even more shocking, particularly in hell. There was no lack of vegetation or life on the ground. In actuality, though, the land had green grass, something that would never have existed in hell. In this particular area, trees that were normally dead were fully alive. Naturally, the sky was the same blood red as usual. They stood there in shock for several minutes while Naruto simply looked around the area irritably. Don't ask. He interrupted their direct question before continuing. disregarding the fully grown trees and the grass surrounding him. While the rest of hell was dead, Kushina and Mito looked around them and saw that nature was alive. Even though there was no wildlife present, the trees and grass were enough to make them both cry a little. The verdant grass and fully blossoming trees were the one thing they missed most about their previous lives. This was Kushina's second missed item from Ningenkai, even though she missed her daughter more than anything else. For a moment, they pondered how and why their master, a devil and one of the most vicious people in history, would reside in such a location. Though the entire area was pitch black, the castle stood in stark contrast to the surrounding area. The bubbling lava and the black lightning dancing across the sky made the castle an ideal location for a devil. Even though the trees and green grass weren't appropriate for the place. They had seen some of them in hell when they attacked Lucifer's strongholds with their master, and the castle's design was peculiar at best. From Kushina's perspective, at least Naruki-chan has a place to play at. She was somewhat content to enjoy her remaining childhood, even if it was in Makai, since she knew her daughter was a little too young to train at the moment. They followed their master until they reached the castle, and when they sensed his Yukai flare, the enormous wooden bridge slowly descended before ending with a loud click. They continued to follow him, and after the three of them had left the bridge, it rose again. Now, if it were possible, Kushina and Mito's jaws would have smashed through the earth as soon as they entered the castle. For they saw something that was truly amazing in front of them. The castle's exterior was completely dark, but its interior was painted in a different style. The corridors were mostly dark with hints of purple. Even though most rooms had white marble floors, the hallway was adorned with a long red crimson blood carpet. However, most rooms had black marble floors instead. On either side of the corridor were statues of gargoyles and demons. Metal knight statues as well stood tall and imposing to children if they ever saw one. Paintings of all kinds littered the hall, some showing great battles between demons and angels, some with demons fighting against other demons. There were 2 chandeliers on the ceiling that glowed brightly. However, since they hadn't even thoroughly explored the castle yet, they knew there was more to it. But as they followed their master, they were astounded by the castle's appearance, architecture, and design. Actually, it was strange because they felt completely at home just by being in this castle. As if this were their real home or some such. They had been following their master for about 5 minutes when they arrived at a door, which he promptly opened to reveal a large room. It had a large red carpet on the floor and was also painted black. It has a built-in bathroom and 2 dressers. A king-size bed has 2 nightstands on either side. According to Kushina, the bed was exquisitely designed because it was expertly constructed and featured artistic woodworking designs. Kushina or Mito, for that matter, had never touched anything as soft as the black silk sheets and pillows. Smaller pillows were scattered across the bed as a decorative touch, and a giant blood-red cover was completed with black flames licking the bottom of the cover. They watched in awe as Naruto simply grunted, tossed the pillows aside, and then pulled the covers and sheets back. He then placed the Kitsune woman, who was sleeping but recovering, in the bed before turning to face Kushina and Mito again. She nodded when he said, "Kushina, put the girl in the bed too. I doubt she's had any good rest for a while now. When they both wake up, she can get something to eat. She looks malnourished beyond reason." She moved to the opposite end of the bed and then carefully put Naruki inside. She then slowly wrapped the sheet and cover over her body before kissing her forehead. Before returning to Mito, she said, "Naruki-chan, it's good to have you back." After that, Naruto covered Akemi and left the room, turning off the lights, with Mito and Kushina in tow. Giving the 2 another anxious look. "Don't worry, you two. This castle is totally impenetrable to any outside force thanks to special runes and barriers." His words of assurance greatly relieved them. Anyone who tries to sneak in, no matter who they are, will be vaporized on the spot. However, questions began to arise about the nature of this location and its connection to their master. They all followed him downstairs to what they decided was the living room, which was heavily furnished with 2 midnight black sofas and 2 dark violet chairs facing a huge fireplace and a giant plasma screen television. However, there was a large painting above the fireplace that neither Kushina nor Mito could identify. However, it appeared as though a couple was holding a small child in their arms. Their master's voice abruptly snapped them out of their reverie, saying, "Kushina, Mito, stop wasting time and sit down. It's time to start explaining our next move." They heard them gulping as they turned to face him and saw him standing in front of the fireplace with a stern expression on his face. When they sat down, Naruto turned around and gave them a piercing look that instantly made them shudder. If there was anything to be feared but revered, it was their master. "You two have changed, and your training will be improved by a few standards. I sense that the 3 realms are stirring, and more battles will soon break out. In addition, I believe that heaven will be far more hostile than it has ever been because of what I did to them today. Thus, going forward, you two and Akemi will receive even more rigorous training than before," he said, causing them to both nod in agreement. Now on a lighter note, you may be wondering what this place is and why it's behind such a giant volcano, he added after noticing this. In actuality, the location where we previously resided was merely an outpost. It served as both a training ground for Lucifer's armies and a lookout post for you two. Now that it's gone, we'll have to go here going forward, he muttered impatiently. Master, may I ask what this place is and how is there even living plant life in this area? Kushina said, raising an eyebrow. This caused Naruto's eyebrow to twitch, and then he let out a sigh of mild annoyance. This castle used to be my home, but I've never used it because I've always been traveling and battling Lucifer and his henchmen. Regarding your second question, I can only speculate that the land was completely destroyed after the first war between heaven and hell destroyed the great forest of Eden. However, I have never been certain. He responded to both of Kushina's inquiries by saying, I believe that some of its soil, which contained holy qualities that not even hell could poison, landed into hell and more specifically this area behind the volcano. As she processed the information, the woman simply nodded. With a sigh, Naruto landed squarely on one of the purple chairs. Mito became a little concerned when he noticed how tired he was and said, Naruto. Sama, not to come across as pushy, but it would help if you got some sleep. You haven't gotten any sleep for the past week or so. Her words caught Kushina's attention. Due to all the training, fighting Lucifer, and getting Naruki. Even though Mito was correct that he hadn't slept well in a while, Naruto simply grunted and dismissed her worry, saying he needed to be vigilant. Even though Lucifer could send his men out at any time, the knowledge that he was inside this castle gave him the confidence to let his guard down. Only a little bit. My health and sleep aren't important. What is? He began, but was unable to finish before his eyelids began to slowly drop. When Mito and Kushina saw this, they got up in concern, but he passed out on the chair a few seconds later. When Kushina and Mito noticed that he was sleeping, they both grinned momentarily and said, Master is always looking out for us. Even when he doesn't show it. Huh? Kushina said, her eyes gentle like a worried woman's as she gazed at her master's form. Yes, even if he hides it well, very well, I can sense he cares for us in his own way and is doing everything he can to ensure we're protected while training us to become stronger so we can protect ourselves, Mito said, nodding in agreement with her own smile plastered on her angelic face. She then walked slowly to his side and knelt beside the chair, staring at her master's sleeping face. Kushina agreed, saying, yeah, he deserves some rest. For all that he's done. They both slowly draped his arms over their shoulders and strained to get him out of the chair. They then swiftly but gently moved to find him a different room to sleep in. After a few minutes, they were fortunate to discover a room with identical designs. The bed, however, had midnight violet covers and was a dark violet color. Before beginning to put him in bed, they slowly unfolded the sheets. However, they had to fight because whatever was underneath his clothes weighed more than a few tons. However, what the two did not come across while doing this was. They instantly froze in front of the doorway when they heard the stern voice say, Mito. Kushina. Stop right there. Their faces showed signs of fear and nervousness. Without hesitation, they turned around, but they moved slowly so as not to meet their master's irate, in their minds, gaze. However, what they saw caused their eyes to widen in surprise. Their master, Naruto, was staring at them blankly. His feet were on the floor as he sat on the bed. The fact that he was pointing to the opposite side of the bed, however, startled them. You two are going to sleep in the same room if you are going to drag me to bed, he said, now come over here and get in bed. They simply nodded slowly, attempting a euro, and failing a euro, to conceal their flushed cheeks. The two's situation only worsened when their master removed his boots and coat before throwing away his shirt as well. However, the two women found it nearly unbearable when he threw away his shirt because they were witnessing the upper body of a god. He had a rocked, hard 8-pack, and there wasn't a single flab of fat on his chest. His chest was lithe but cleanly cut. Although his skin is flawless, he has a few scars on his shoulders and an X-shaped scar near his heart. In addition, they were so embarrassed that they couldn't resist staring at his body. In order to conceal their practical red glowing faces, they hastily hid under the covers. Their redness intensified when they felt Naruto enter the bed as well. To avoid disturbing Naruto's sleep, those poor women would spend the rest of the night sleeping entirely on one side of the bed. If only they were aware of the circumstances in which they would awaken tomorrow. All of Makai was in the early hours of the morning, with the sky changing from a deep black to its usual crimson. The whole of Makai was illuminated by the early morning as the ever blood. Colored clouds began to appear. Demons everywhere began to awaken and begin their daily tasks, which could include torturing someone, devouring a mortal's poor soul, or simply destroying those who were weaker than themselves. Another group of demons began to awaken from their slumber as the people of Makai gradually began to get up for their daily activities. Devils, mostly, but you get the idea. The breathtakingly gorgeous scenery behind Mount Unmei, the largest volcano in Makai, was teeming with grassy green fields and vibrant, living green trees. All of Makai would be shocked to see such a place in a realm known for its chaotic surroundings and air filled with brimstone. A separated plot of land with a massive pool of lava passed this field of vibrant green trees, separating the land from the other piece of dirt that was floating above the bubbling lava pool. A castle with a terrifying design that was more suited to Makai itself than the lush surroundings was perched atop the enormous pile of dirt. Its demonic design and completely black walls indicated that it belonged to a demon of some kind. Even though there were only 2 people in Makai who could effectively combat him, the demon who lived in this castle was so powerful that it caused the entire island to tremble. To him, everyone else was nothing more than a sheep to be slaughtered. The room at Hellwing Castle Euro, Naruto Muan. The room of one Hellwing Naruto, Devil of Makai, was filled with the sound of joyful moaning. One might wonder why such a sound would emanate from his room, while others might assume that he was making fun of a female companion because of the female tone of his voice. However, since he was doing nothing, that was a little incorrect. Because he was still sleeping. 3 figures were lying on the king Sai's bed, one of whom was a man who was now identified as Naruto. He was sound asleep and oblivious to his surroundings. The 2 other figures, however, could be interpreted as female because they were essentially on top of him or cuddled up to him. The figures could be interpreted as both Uzumaki Kushina and Uzumaki Mito, even though they are now recognized as Naruto's first 2 slaves. The long-haired, maroon-haired woman who was unconsciously cuddling up to her master was Kushina. While rubbing her body against his, she moaned his name and explored him with her hands. She was releasing a lot of pheromones from this alone, so it wasn't the only thing. If only she realized that she was also leaking from her 2 lovely mounds in her lower lips. She said, unaware of her current position, Naruto Sama. However, she began to awaken from her enjoyable dream when she heard another sound. Another voice that gradually roused Kushina was, "Oh, Naru Sama. I love you." Before she felt her hands touching something that was simultaneously soft and firm, she slowly blinked her eyes to wake herself. She glanced at her hands blearily, seeing them wandering over someone's chiseled chest. As she looked up in realization, her face practically burst into a flush so red that people would have thought her head was a tomato. "Oh Cammy, if he wakes up to this, things are going to get awkward." Sensing that she was getting hot, she moved slightly, only to feel moisture touch her lower lips and mounds. She looks down slowly and flushes even more when she sees the stains through her panties and bra. When she noticed the 2 tiny puddles on the sheets, her flush became even more intense. Both of her fluids were readily leaking from their fabrical clothing. "By Cammy. I really did leak that much." Kushina's eyes widened as she heard the words, Naru.kun. "Don't stop. Cammy, I love you." She looked up at her master's upper body and saw Mito sprawled on it. Her left hand groping his toned chest and torn abs, her body almost rubbing itself onto him every now and then. The dream she was having caused her face to flush a lot. She must have had a very unusual dream that led to her current condition. In addition to the fact that her breasts were out of their bra, which caused her milk to flow down his chest and her abundant mounds to gleam from the excess fluid, her right hand was lowered, gently massaging the bulge in his lower underwear. Her fluids were also leaking out of her silk black panties, which were stained even though they were still on. Although Mito's face was flushed, it was clear that she was having a relaxed, almost euphoric dream. However, Kushina was aware that she needed to wake her up in case their master woke up and saw them both in this situation. She could only imagine what would happen if he did. In any case, how is he still asleep? Kushina quietly and slowly propped herself up on her elbow before putting her hand on Mito's shoulder. She initially pushed her sister a little, but she received no response and continued to mumble. She shook her shoulder a little harder this time, causing her to complain in annoyance. Kushina became agitated and gave her another firm but quiet shake while uttering her name. "Psst," she whispered, "Mito. Wake up." So as not to wake her sleeping master. After some time, Mito finally stirred, indicating that she was awake. But my goodness, when she woke up, Mito gave her such a fierce look that Kushina flinched in sheer terror. Her scowl was so evil. It was like having Naruto's own eyes staring at you. They were purple, striking orbs that, with just a glance, could make even the most fearful demons drop to their knees. She must have inherited his glare after spending the most time with him. "Why did you wake me up?" was Mito's low, yet deadly, tone that made the woman shudder, and then she pointed silently toward Naruto. Did Kushina look up, raising an eyebrow at her anxious expression? Only because she sees Naruto, who is still asleep but barely stirring, her eyes widen with fear and comedy. Something caused his face to twitch a little, but it was unclear what it was. When she practically leapt from the bed into the doorway so quickly, Mito only responded at that moment. Kushina herself blinked a few times to get used to what she saw. Even though it was only a blur, it was undoubtedly the fastest Mito she had ever seen go. She glanced in the woman's direction and noticed her face was burning intensely, her cheeks swollen with a flush so intense that it could have turned a cherry pale. Pale as a ghost. If things weren't so serious, Kushina would have laughed at Mito's condition. She crawled off the bed slowly so as not to wake her master before she and Mito exchanged glances. A silent discussion about how to deal with the situation they were in took place in their minds. "Let's tidy up and go before he discovers it, and then we can talk." With this nod, the two quietly and slowly began cleaning up the fluids to make sure everything was clean before departing in silence so as not to wake their master. Did they have a brief conversation with Kushina to break the ice after shutting the door and leaving? With a cute blush on her cheeks, she said, "Mito-chan, I think we need to speak about our feelings for Naruto-sama. Later on, if what I heard and what I dreamed were what I think similar, then we need to speak about this. Later, that is." She could still clearly recall the situation she and Mito were in, and as she glanced at her sister, she noticed that Mito's face and cheeks were burning at the thought of what had just transpired. "Why? Yeah, I think we do," she said in a low, ashamed voice, looking at Kushina. Their violet eyes met, and they both gave apprehensive smiles before leaving Naruto's room. Before something like that occurs again, it was time for them to discuss their feelings for their devil master. If Naruto had woken up during that, she could only speculate as to what might have happened. What would he do, Kami? Might he have been angry, disturbed by what we did, or stayed neutral as usual? There are a lot of theories that have not yet been resolved. Mito and Kushina both wondered what would have happened to Naruto-sama if he had been awakened during that time. They had a thorough understanding of their master, but not enough to know what he would have done in that circumstance. She and Kushina could only hope that they could stop those events from happening again by easing the mounting pressure of their intense feelings for him before it becomes unmanageable. "I hope." The room at Hellwing Castle Naruto. We find our favorite devil waking up for another training and combat day 30 seconds after Kushina and Mito left to clean up their mess. His face shifted into a more impassive manner as usual, and his purple eyes slowly opened. However, as his eyes adapted to his new location, a flicker of confusion appeared in his eyes, because he did not see Kushina or Mito as he slowly moved around in the bed and put his feet on the floor. "You must have woken up already." Then, suddenly, a strange smell filled his nostrils. He wasn't exactly sure what it was, but he had a nagging suspicion. The thought caused a tiny frown to appear on his face, but it was one of confusion rather than rage, spite, or hatred. A feeling he hardly ever experiences. The inner thoughts of our very own Devil Emperor, our favorite nightmare of Makai, were, that scent musky, yet intoxicating. Since it was known to everyone that the entity with such power had such thoughts, if someone had ever heard those exact thoughts, they would have fainted out in shock. Putting the idea off for later, Naruto simply snapped his fingers, causing the somewhat disorganized bed to transform into an invisible wind shift. Before putting on fresh clothes for the new day, which he knew would be hectic for everyone living in the castle, he glanced at it. As he imagined the three women's faces for their training, which was primarily Akemi's, he thought mildly amusedly, mostly for Kushina, Mito, and Akemi though. That caused a grin to appear on his face that was so full of pure evil and malice that even Yami, the Makai god, would have cringed. He walked to the shower, prepared to wash his body before the day began, after seeing the bed made and his clothes draped over his arm. Kitchen at Hellwing Castle. It had only been 15 minutes since the minor accident in Naruto's room, when they woke up from their sleep, when Kushina and Mito returned. Since then, two have been strangely quiet with one another while preparing breakfast for everyone. The person humming joyfully was Kushina, who was standing over the stove wearing a pink apron that read, "One Hot Mama." Kushina moved quickly and deftly over the stove, stirring and tossing the food she was preparing for Mito and herself as she went to another pan, then flipping a pancake into the air with grace. With practiced ease, they went 1, 2, and 3 onto a plate. That is, until she opened the oven and took out 2 trays that appeared to contain 2 enormous Legs. She put the two trays on the opposite side of the stove, grinning broadly the entire time, oblivious to Mito's amused look. Since they were also using this castle as a home, she thought it would be beneficial to have a somewhat normal breakfast before the training started, so she set the table for breakfast and other things. She had never done this before. Yes, she was aware that if tomorrow was any indication, she and Kushina would be getting even more training and more intense than before, in addition to Akemi. She would acknowledge that she was afraid of the regime her master gave her and Kushina, but she couldn't deny its effectiveness, so it sent chills down her spine. Very successful. When Mito and Kushina heard footsteps, they turned to see a drowsy-eyed Naruki descend the stairs with a drowsy Akemi following. Mito and Kushina both giggled as the tiny, recently transformed Naruki rubbed her eyes and gave a cute yawn. That is before her nose twitches and her ears perk up. What is that odor? She said this while surveying her surroundings, just before she saw her Ka-san, who was amusedly staring at her while she and Mito were setting the plates on the table. She smiled as she turned to face her daughter and said, "It's breakfast, Masumi. Come on, you two. Let's sit down and wait for master before we eat." She then ushered the two to their seats. As she gazed oddly at the pile of pancakes on her plate, Naruki stood expectantly next to her Ka-san. She began to poke at it lightly, which made the other three women laugh a lot. It was even funnier when she sniffed it like the inquisitive child she was. Until they heard footsteps again, inexplicably, and the overwhelming presence of that which only filled the room caused Kushina and Mito to stiffen, while Akemi became very anxious. Naruki blinked incoherently at her mother's flinch. When they looked up the stairs, they saw the master, Hellwing Naruto, in all his glory, walking down impassively as ever but appearing somehow rejuvenated because his aura simply indicated that he was back to normal after being so exhausted, and even then, there was something about him that was different. They were unable to determine what it was, but Mito and Kushina were both able to acknowledge that something was there and were pleased to see that he was now more at ease than before. Before they focused on the food on the table, his purple eyes looked down at them as he walked, seemingly bewildered by what was happening. As he approached his own seat, which was at the head of the table, he suddenly realized that this was before it was squashed down. He sat down and looked at each of the residents. Given everything that had transpired yesterday, he could see Akemi's nervous state, which was understandable, and Naruki's bewildered but silent expression demonstrated that she was at least respectful. Did he notice that the last two were oddly anxious but did their best to hide it? However, he could still see it, so he made a note to speak with them later. He raised an eyebrow as he looked at his food at the table, which was arranged in a tray with bowls of particular foods. He shrugged and started eating, indicating to the others to follow suit. This was amusing because soon Naruki needed assistance eating her own food, so Kushina cut hers while teaching her how to do it. Overall, the group experienced an odd but somewhat enjoyable silence because, to Mito and Kushina, they had never eaten breakfast with their master at the table in such a way. But before he spoke, Naruto got their attention as they were finishing their meal. "Kushina," he said, attracting the attention of his gorgeous red-haired slave who was carrying the dishes with her. When she went to get his own, he spoke. Yes. She can be the fiery woman she was always known for, but when it comes to the man who changed her life for the better and showed such unbelievable power, and even more so the one who took her daughter away from the life she had in Ningenkai. Her voice sounded oddly hesitant and nervous of what he was going to say. It made sense that she was anxious, he said with approval in his tone. The food was excellent. I never knew you were such a skilled cook, especially the cooked orc leg meat and the blood herb seasoning. Truly that was very sublime. Her food was simply perfect, and everything he said was true. Yes, he ate the meat of dead demons, but what other demon didn't? For him, it was the best thing he had ever tasted in his long, immortal life. It did not matter if it was fresh, seasoned, cooked, or raw. What Kushina did was. It's simply delicious. When Kushina heard his words, she was paralyzed, and Naruto's words kept repeating in her head. At that point, her cheeks began to flush so much that it appeared as though she would faint from the speed at which the blood was reaching her head. She bowed quickly but respectfully before speaking. The man simply waved his hand and shook his head when she said, Thank you, Naruto. Sama. I don't deserve such praise. Ibane. He grabbed his plate, pushed his chair in, and proceeded to the sink to wash his own dish while talking. Nonsense, you deserve that, but I still want you and Mito to get Naruki and Akemi together and meet in the living room. It's time we started planning out the training for all of you. She simply nodded curtly before departing, which is fortunate because Naruto never saw her genuine smile or her enormous blush, which could have made the flames of hellfire seem insignificant in comparison. However, knowing that Naruto and the other two would have a serious conversation, she followed instructions and went to meet them before they left for the living chambers. In particular, if what he told them last night was any indication. If only they were aware of the veracity of their ideas. Living rooms in Hellwing Castle. The three women were gathered in the living rooms, and Lil Naruki was perched on her Sans lap. Naruki simply looked around in confusion as the four of them on the couch gazed at the master of their lives, especially Mito, Kushina, and Akemi. Because of the solemn atmosphere that pervaded the chambers, the three older women couldn't help but feel very anxious. It was like an endless black hole that would engulf you in its absence. Naruto turned around and looked at each of the people in front of him, each of whom had a slave of some kind, either by contract or by choice. Two former humans who were transformed into devils, an abandoned Biju who would stop at nothing to win his approval, and a young child who was the daughter of his second slave and a kitsune. Devil hybrid. Hey, that's interesting. We now have two new guests added to our small group, as Mito and Kushina are aware, Naruto said after gathering his thoughts and stomping his inner thoughts. It was true that all four of them had a connection to one another, tying them together like a kind of spiritual line, so I don't think we need an introduction since you all know each other by some extension. The girls nodded, or in Naruki's case, she tilted her cute little head in confusion. She was understandably perplexed by Naruto's remarks, but her only concern was that she was with her Ka-san and in a house where she would never have to worry about being attacked. After observing their undivided focus, he proceeded, saying, as of today, I'm going to be planning a training schedule for Akemi. Now that she's my slave, she will adhere to all of the training I give her without ever complaining. Since you are currently nothing more than a newborn infant in comparison to the weakest demons in both Lucifer's and Yami's armies, I will be subjecting you to physical conditioning to strengthen your body and power until I say otherwise. Additionally, we will work on your kitsune.no.bi, Foxfire, and your second affinity, which is darkness itself, which is shared by all kitsunes. Additionally, I will personally train you, Kushina, and Mito to improve your reflexes using my own method. In order to improve your chances of managing the power boost without going crazy like your predecessor, I want you to increase your Yukai and control when you do become the Jubi. As he explained to the group, that means you will also learn how to control the 7 Sin Yukai gates without attaining the backlash. Also during the test with you against Mito yesterday, he continued, ignoring Akemi's wide-eyed expression. What I witnessed was your instincts taking over, which is sometimes advantageous for kitsunes but can also be fatal. Because you will make poor decisions that might end up killing you if you are unable to control your instincts. Akemi, who was pale and wide-eyed, nodded slowly as she processed what he had said. So you will also be learning how to master that as well. You are to never let your instincts control you like that again and stomp them down, thus controlling them, making you far superior in a fight. She flinched as Naruto saw this before he looked into her eyes, seeing the cold, stone, hard purple orbs staring directly into her own crimson ruby slitted eyes. Her entire body began to tremble wildly, and she felt the oxygen in her completely evaporate. She was certain that she would have collapsed to her knees if she had been upright. It seemed as though he was staring at her with his hand securely grasping her soul, ready to remove it at any moment. However, that wasn't far from the reality. Now, do you understand? Naruto said to the visibly trembling Biju after observing her condition. He spoke in a tone that ended all disagreements. He disregarded the child named Naruki's anxious, worried eyes as well as her trembling, pale state. He did observe that Kushina and Mito were unmoving, even though they knew Akemi had to respond honestly and completely to demonstrate her resolve to finish this, even if it meant facing his training. With all the honesty a kitsune could muster, she said, yes. I am Naruto. Sama. I will follow through it all and without a single complaint. I swear it to you. My lord. It appeared to work because Naruto nodded slightly, then looked at Kushina and Mito, causing them to straighten under his icy yet strong gaze. As for Kushina and Mito, you two will receive 10 times more training than you previously received. Because you both need to improve your reflexes, you two will also be working with Akemi to do so. As I warned you both last night, things will get bloody very quickly, which is why your training will be intensified so quickly. As I train you three, I'll also be working out on my own whenever I can. At the end of each week, we'll spar. He said to the three women, and occasion I'll take each of you on a training trip as the two left behind will continue their training regimen, upping it daily. Even though they were all pale white, they nodded, and Akemi's eyes widened more than Mito's or Kushina's. Now that this is resolved, we will start training today, so prepare yourself. His tone made the hairs on the backs of the three demonesses stand up straight and sent chills down their spines. Then meet me in the back so we can begin your training. The girls' training then started. Oh, the atrocities they encountered. However, what lay ahead would soon change the very course of existence for all living things in heaven, Makai, and Ningenkai. 5 days later, only 5 days have passed since Naruto started training his newest slave and intensified Mito and Kushina's training. And Akemi completely threw the word pain out of the window in those days alone. She was forced into the training her master had given her, shattering her entire conception of the word in front of her eyes. She was rendered completely immobile in a single day when she was unable to move any part of her body and collapsed face down on the ground from sheer exhaustion. It was kind of funny to see the strongest Biju and queen of the Kitsune race reduced to a new slave of Mikai's most powerful devil, but more so, Mito had to carry her into the castle to rest up on the first. To have passed out from sheer exhaustion, to have been out before she even touched the ground. Naturally, she wasn't alone because Kushina and Mito were also introduced to their upgraded training on the same day. It was even more difficult and agonizing for them because it was laid in front of them and had been raised 10 times. Although they were nearly as good as Akemi, they persisted nonetheless because of their master's training, which had given them a stronger body over the years. So they could be punished much more. However, as she, Mito, and Akemi were leaving the training site, Kushina continued to say wearily that their master's training was actually the boot camp from hell. Not only that, but the training they received to improve their reflexes was second only to sparring against him, and it could only be described as pure horror. What happened was that Naruto used several lightning spells on both of them, forcing them to dodge. This would have been easy if it had been regular lightning. However, this was not your typical lightning, rather, it was the black, purple, streaked lightning that Naruto was almost using to kill Akemi. The lightning itself was powerful enough to destroy the Jubi. Yes, all three of them did their best to avoid the lightning spells, but Akemi in particular did so when she wasn't feeling well. She would have perished. Fortunately, she was repeatedly saved by her Kitsune reflexes. However, after a challenging training day, Mito and Kushina were soaking in the hot spring on the 4th day, which gave them the shock of their lives. Rewind. Both Kushina and Mito let out sighs of satisfaction as they relaxed in the hot spring, allowing their tense muscles and wounds to heal. The hot spring's temperature caused the two women's faces to flush a little, and Kushina gave Mito a sidelong glance as they relaxed in the warm steaming water. As she said, "You know Mito-chan, sometimes I wonder if Naruto-sama is trying to kill us with his training." Mito, in spite of herself, laughed a little. Choosing to respond to her, she said, "That may seem accurate, but we both know that Naruto-sama would never purposefully kill us unless we betrayed him, in which case he would, but we would never do that. The war with Lucifer and Yami is making him feel even more tense, and all he wants is for us to be stronger than before. In the event that he is not present, he wants us to defend ourselves. Thus, in a sense, based on what I can see, he takes care of us in his own way, which is through this training. That's what I can figure out," she said, sighing happily as her mind returned to her master, deepening her flush. The same was true for Kushina, who remembered the infrequent occasions she saw her master take care of them as Mito's words reverberated in her head. Recalling the moment he made remarks about her cooking, beauty, and the fact that he actually allowed her to lean against him during the altercation between Akemi and Mito. That caused her to flush a lot, but not as much as when she remembered that she and Mito shared a bed with him, which led to that predicament. Her entire face burst into a cherry red at the thought, attracting Mito's attention. She said, "Oi," in concern for the woman she views as a younger sister. "Kushina-chan, are you alright?" "Oi oi," concerned for the redhead, she said. However, she soon began to tremble and comically, I might add slap her face repeatedly after receiving only an inconsiderate response. When Kushina blinked at her without acknowledging the stinging pain of being slapped repeatedly, Mito finally received a response after a few attempts. Did she mumble, "Nay Mito-chan, I apologize, I was just remembering that event with Naruto-kun. He, while grinning silly through her glazed eyes, she said in a slightly playful manner. When Mito learned about that, she instantly turned red in the face, recalling every detail of what had happened. It seemed like it had just happened. Just picturing herself in such a precarious situation, her incredibly beautiful dream about her master. She got chills just thinking about repeatedly mumbling her love for him while massaging his hard, muscular body. She then recalled the specific conversation she and Kushina had shortly after, which made her blush even more but allowed her to speak. She mentioned that, which caused Kushina to fully awaken from her daze. "Anyo Kushina-chan. I think we need to talk about that," she said. She understood what Mito was talking about because they had agreed to talk about it so that the situation wouldn't arise again. The mere thought of Mito made her flush. She nodded wearily as she looked at Mito. Hi. I think we do. Ebane, she stammered, causing Mito to nod in agreement despite her blush. The two fell into a tense, anxious silence that gradually began to affect them as they fidgeted. The two became worse and worse over the next few seconds, until at last, they were powerless to stop themselves. The phrase, "I love Naruto, Sama," is used. They both said it in perfect unison, and then there was another moment of excruciating silence while the two stunning women gaped at each other in shock at the other's declaration. That is, before they both pointed at each other and exchanged words. "Are you a fan of Naruto, Sama or Naruto?" Once more, they spoke in unison, but this time Mito sighed shakily before turning to face Kushina, who was equally shocked. This time, Mito broke the awkward silence by speaking first after gathering her shaky thoughts. "So, I was right, you also like him. I had my doubts, but hearing you say it in such a fiery way proves that you feel the same way about him as I do, don't you, Kushi-chan?" She addressed her sister and fellow slave. When the redhead blushed at her words and then responded hesitantly, she received a positive response. Her words were so full of passion and love that they made Mito smile even more. "Yes, I have loved him for a long time, and I feel whole when I'm with him. This feeling has persisted for as long as I've been with him. It's difficult to explain, but the one time he remarked on my beauty, it was enough to send me into a state of bliss and practically send my heart soaring." With both of her hands clasped to her chest in a prayerful position, Kushina said, "I love him so much and dearly wish to stay by his side for the rest of our eternal lives and the end of days. Even then I'll love him forever and ever." She told her sister how she felt about the man she loved, and her cheeks were now a little pink. Despite knowing that there would be repercussions, he went ahead and saved my baby girl Naruki-chan. He has given Naruki and me a new life that is, in all honesty, far better than the one I had before. With a few tears streaming down her face, she said, "I owe him everything he's given me, and I will pay him back in full with everything I can give back, whether that be my life or my very soul. I gladly give my love to him in full. Just to be with him and by his side for eternity." Throughout Kushina's speech, Mito was looking into her violet eyes and could see how much she loved Naruto, just as she did. Mito closed her eyes and embraced Kushina, drawing her nearer to her. The younger woman hugged her back. Mito sighed a little and then smiled softly at the woman in her arms as she ran a hand through her hair. "You're familiar with Kushina-chan. You can be so much stronger than I am at times." Admitting this must have taken a lot of courage, which is something I lack when it comes to situations like this. "Let me tell you, what you said is exactly like how I felt when I first met our master. I was genuinely both awed and afraid of him." When she said, "A devil of Makai is what I truly saw him when I first met him," the woman drew back to look at her, indicating that she was paying attention. "But after a while I saw him differently. He is more than just the feared Akuma, devil, of Makai," Mito said, grinning at this. "He saved my life from a fate worse than death, a fate of slavery and servitude. I looked forward to his return to take my soul and complete our deal from that day on. Even after I passed away, I found his presence alluring. Even though he may not be aware of it, I became closer to him as our time together went on. Even when he told me one day that I looked lovely without my hair in a bun, I would die for him with a smile on my face because I love him so much," she remarked, her eyes glazed over in memory of that day. "My feelings for him, no matter how ridiculous it sounds, grew from just that one compliment." When Kushina heard this, she grinned even more and gave Mito a tighter hug. Mito's eyes softened as she looked down at her, and she then laid her head on Kushina's and sank a little deeper into the steaming water. "Our master, Naruto-kun, is undoubtedly a very complex man, but I would never abandon him. It's been a little dream of mine to make that man smile for something other than violence or disfiguring his adversaries, to make him smile when he's not killing or fighting." Mito, who was also flushed rosy pink, said, "You could say that my love for him runs deep, very deep." As she embraced Mito and felt her hands running through her hair, Kushina heard what she was saying. She sighed with satisfaction and then began to speak slowly. She pulled back her tears, but her flush was still there, if anything darker than before. "I see. But you know Mito-chan. If we want to stop those predicaments from happening again until we tell him how we feel, we're gonna need to outlet our emotions in another way that is," she said. "You understand what I mean," she said in a deep voice that made Mito shudder, even more so when she noticed Kushina's smirk, which somehow spread like an angel across her face. She spoke while leaning in her direction. "I think I can agree with that, Kushi-chan," the woman said, and then the steam became more apparent as they got closer. The two women then locked lips and remained there, occasionally groaning for the other partner. As the steam became more apparent, the two gradually sank farther into the hot spring until they were completely hidden. Anyone in the vicinity of the hot springs during this period would have heard shifting shadows of females slamming into one another as well as tiny, feminine groans of pleasure coming from within. It's a good thing Naruto wasn't nearby because he was training either Akemi or Naruki. If only they were aware of what was going on behind that. End of flashback. Since that day, Mito and Kushina have been oddly closer than ever before. They have expressed their feelings for the man they love, and after realizing they needed a way to let go of their pent-up emotions, they have adopted a different approach, if you will. Since they were sisters, they were practically acquainted, living each other's lives. They obviously kept their actions a secret from Naruto, Akemi, and Naruki because it would be awkward if they knew. Naturally, this made the two women much more at ease and allowed them to focus more on their training after letting go of their suppressed feelings. They both still had a deep affection for their master, and they made a promise to each other that night to show him how much they cared. No matter how much time it takes, they will eventually show him and make him smile. One that wasn't used to slay Lucifer's men or Yami's armies or to kill demons. If they can extract it from him, it would be a smile they would always treasure. However, that is a challenge in and of itself. However, like the fierce women they wear a euro, more specifically, cushion a euro. They would not give up until they achieved that objective and, in some way, communicated their emotions to him. So they won't have to hold it inside every time they walk alongside him or simply be around him. Naruto noticed that they were working harder and more focused than before, but other than that, not much had changed. He raised an eyebrow at their behavior, but eventually he simply nodded his approval, to which they blushed and then bowed in appreciation. The young Naruki was genuinely amazed by the sight of the three women training, but that wasn't the only reason she watched. It makes sense that as a child, she would have been both amazed and thrilled to see such things. Surprisingly enough, Naruki had asked Naruto in a courteous but enthusiastic manner if she could observe what she believed to be the super cool moves that Ka-san was performing. To the child's dismay, Naruto refused, stating that this training would undoubtedly result in her death. She was too young to handle the ungodly strain of what he would have to teach her in order to simply catch up with the regular training. Because of this, Naruki and Akemi were spotted strolling together right now. The young girl wanted to spend some time outside the castle, so Kushina, who trusted Akemi to keep Naruki safe, allowed them to leave with Naruto's partial approval. Naruki was initially disappointed that she was unable to train, but like the intelligent youngster she is for her age, she was reassured by her Ka-san about the consequences of her training and what they were doing. She wanted to go outside and play like any other child her age because, despite her understanding, she was still upset about everything. Akemi smiled up at the girl, whom she has come to regard as her own daughter and who, on paper, was her daughter. As they crossed the tree, which was naturally quite large because it had been raised in the soil of Eden itself, she held the young girl's hand in her own. Only while she and Naruki were strolling did they both fail to notice the shadowed figure in the forest glaring at her. Only his white angel wings were visible. No more demon scum attempting to poison the chosen one. He then made a move. At the same moment, Hellwing Castle. As this was happening, both Kushina and Mito were lying on the couches in the Hellwing Castle, completely worn out from their training, unkempt and hurt, but already recovering. However, their mental fatigue wouldn't recover in the same manner. Shame. Naruto himself was observing the two with approval. They were adjusting to their new training swiftly enough, and Akemi was as well, despite the fact that she was constantly on the verge of death. He nodded slowly, even though the results already indicated that Akemi had improved and was only 5 days stronger than she had been. However, as he slowly looked out the window, he couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was going to happen. A small amount of anxiety crept into him, causing him to frown slightly in both confusion and anger. But why? He had a sudden rush of something ever since he let Akemi and Naruki outside for a little while, which made him frown even more. What is this dreadful feeling? At that moment, he, Kushina, and Mito sensed it. They felt the holy power within, but none of them flinched when the sudden surge of power hit them. Thus, when Naruto felt that power, his own eyes narrowed and flashed a dark crimson, causing both Kushina and Mito to become anxious. However, when he used his senses to reach out, he discovered that Naruki's power signature was extremely low and Akemi's was. His fist clenched so tightly upon sensing Naruki's that it drew blood because hers was gone. Reacting swiftly, Naruto turned to face both Kushina and Mito before saying, "Girls come, we have an intruder outside the castle. Let's go." However, as the girls were going into shock, they could feel his rage evaporating from him in waves. "This better not be what I think it is. Or there is gonna be hell pay," he said. "That's right, Naruto. Sama." After saying that, the three swiftly vanished into 3 pillars of hellfire. While the latter was a completely different situation, the two of them hoped that Akemi and Naruki were both doing well. Kami's court at the same time during this time, We could hear arguments about the recent events involving heaven's greatest adversary, aside from Lucifer himself, taking place in Kami's court once more. The once orderly and relatively peaceful court of the all-powerful deities has recently descended into chaos due to the actions of one devil. Even the higher than thou deities were acting immaturely in response to the recent commotion that has caused heaven to veer off course and into the figurative realm of disorder, with one deity blaming the other and insulting another. In essence, the lower and mid-level gods were behaving like pampered kids who had just had their favorite toy taken away. In addition to using the mother of the Chosen One as a slave, Hellwing has gone too far this time and now has the very Chosen One in his damned grasp. We cannot allow him to continue getting away with his crimes against us for too long, shouted out one of these very deities, who happened to be god over the storms and the notorious Susanoo, elder sibling of Izanagi's children. The court itself became even more chaotic as a result of his outcry. The deity is normally composed and private, but after this recent action, he is even furious that this being has taken action against them. Spitting in their faces and then rubbing it in made them even more irate. To be honest, he had no idea why Megami or Kami were so forgiving of the aforementioned creature. Perhaps it was because they had been keeping such a close eye on him? According to their behavior, the aforementioned deities were both incredibly irritated with their fellow deities. Although Naruto had committed a horrible act against them and all of heaven, they actually felt relieved that he had done it. By all means, Kami was scolding herself for ever placing that damned prophecy on her in the first place and thanking him repeatedly in her heart. She may be the most powerful of all the gods, second only to Izanagi, the god of creation, but she had flaws, and this was the most significant. She could only express her gratitude to Naruto once more for fixing her error within herself, even though he did it in a way that was distinct in and of itself. However, she had to maintain appearances, so she got to her feet and quickly used a tiny burst of power to silence every god in the room and cause them to collapse in their seats. If there was one thing they all agreed upon, it was that Kami had just released such a tremendous amount of power that they were all trembling in their seats, unlike Megami. You should never be angry with Kami because she is the deity of life for a very good reason. If you give it to her, she can just as easily take it away. We can start this meeting properly now that you have all stopped acting like little kids. As everyone is already aware, one Hellwing Naruto, Akuma, and Akuma Taiton, Demon Titan, of Makai have taken not just any human to Makai, but the one I have selected to be the savior of humanity. It is undoubtedly a horrible act, but let me remind everyone that she would have died by now if he hadn't come, she said, causing some of them to recoil. Before saying, that may be true Kami-sama, but remember that taking a human to Makai is a serious offense, Yami snorted. They struck a deal with him, allowing him to bring the bodies and souls of Uzumaki Kushina and Uzumaki Mido to Makai. The deity and ruler of hell said, now Uzumaki Naruki is different for two reasons. First, she never made a deal with him, and second, she is the chosen one, which should give her an even more important role considering this. Other deities nodded in agreement with his statement, acknowledging that it was against Kami's own laws to take a human to Makai if they had nothing to do with that demon. By all rights, the demon is considered to have been killed at first sight if the mortal was taken to Makai despite having no connection to that particular demon. However, there are specific circumstances. That is true, but that is not the case for Yusi in Naruki's case. It is that she is in reality when Hellwing Naruto marked Kushina during her pregnancy, so. Kami nodded his head while scolding Yami inwardly. All of the gods inside were alerted when the court doors slammed open. A bloody, struggling armored angel guard entered, looking toward the people who had interrupted the meeting. A few gods gasped as Kami and Megami hurried to their feet, their faces plastered with urgency and concern. I wonder what happened to you, Daisuke. Taicho asked Megami. As he spoke, Taicho moved slowly forward, his badly wounded body dripping blood. While he was speaking, all of the gods turned pale, and Kami and Megami were both more shocked than the others. He trailed off before he was caught by another guard. It was. And Nora. He and the Crusader Legion. The ones you put in solitude. They broke out. And Nora set out to Makai. To get the chosen one. His men held us off. I'm sorry why, he said, before he fell. His words resonated throughout the court as he was hauled off to the medical bay. The news that was recently delivered to them shocked some people, but it shocked almost everyone. Before the words of a trembling Kami reverberated throughout the court, even Yami was stunned by what had been said. The words described Kami's current emotions, which included anger and, surprisingly, a faint hint of fear. Kami Megami, who was now trembling, said, those fools have no idea what they've done. Megami was in a similar state because she knew exactly what was going to happen. Before anyone could question her, at that very moment. Boom! Court was under pressure from a tremendous explosion of pure power, which also caused the chamber to tremble and crack. Because of the strain and trembling of their own realm, some deities had to cling to the table in order to maintain their damned equilibrium. Before they realized who it was and how strong the yokai itself was, they all felt a very familiar spike of yokai, which caused their eyes to widen. As Megami gazed at the swirling mass of hellfire and darkness outside the Crusader Legion's headquarters, she was limited to a few words that captured everything she was thinking at the time. He's here, Hellwing has arrived. Grounds of an older Hellwing castle. Prior to this, we can see Naruto, Mito, and Kushina appear in pillars of hellfire outside of Hellwing Castle in Makai. Naruto felt the spike right there, and then he felt Naruki's signature entirely disappear. However, as soon as they appeared, Naruto saw Akemi lying on the ground with serious injuries. Both Kushina and Mito then hurried to her side in quick succession. Naruto slowly looked around as they went, which only strengthened his suspicions, making him clench his fist more tightly every second. He looked down at Akemi's fallen form as he walked toward the women who were huddled together. As he looked at her, he noticed wounds that only a holy person could cause. Her entire back and left arm were cauterized by what appeared to be a blade. He did, however, pay close attention when he saw Akemi sobbing and mumbling about Naruki. She continued, unfazed by her words, I tried to stop him. But I circa couldn't. He overwhelmed me. I'm so sorry. I failed you. I couldn't protect her. I failed her. I am sorry Naruto. Sama. Before the trickling of fear began to creep in, Mito and Kushina's eyes were wide with the realization as they were being spoken. That is, until Naruto knelt down very slowly, his spiky hair bangs casting shadows over his eyes, making him appear even more eerie. He touched Akemi's forehead slowly before speaking in a low voice that startled both Kushina and Mito. That is, until they could hear the underlying tone that made them both shudder because his voice resonated with an unmatched coldness. In spite of her wounds, Akemi's eyes abruptly began to close as he said, I see. Do not worry any longer Akemi. Sleep. Naruto channeled his yokai into his hand and closed his eyes as they finally close. The devil uttered a few words in a whisper. The mind reads, Sha, I yawned. Naruto used this technique to see what Akemi saw, essentially everything she saw that he had recently seen. And his suspicions were confirmed by what he saw, so he slowly released the technique and stood up, his eyes still shaded by his golden hair bangs. Blood appeared to be dripping quickly onto the floor as his fists clenched so tightly that the knuckles were bleached white. You deserve that much, Akemi. You did well by keeping him at bay long enough for him to increase his power. After saying, it would seem a certain legion and their captain need to learn something. Mito. Kushina take Akemi in and start healing her. Those wounds are from a holy blade. If left alone too long it will poison her. Naruto turned his head slightly toward Mito and Kushina. His tone was as cold and uninterested as ever, but the two women could almost see the anger evaporating from him. Prior to Kushina looking at her master and lord and speaking, Mito swiftly hefted Akemi up in a bridal carry, sensing what he was about to do. She was extremely concerned when she saw Naruki gone, but she did know one thing about Naruto. Once you take something that belongs to someone else, you are dead. Since Naruki was and still is his daughter, taking her away from his family would be tantamount to giving yourself over to the Grim Reaper. No matter how much she wanted to just go with him, she knew deep down that he would bring her back, so she wouldn't beg him to do it. Even if it meant bringing heaven down to accomplish it. She was only able to say a few words to him before hurrying to the castle. Naruto. Sama. Good luck, she said, bowing briefly before turning around and making her way there. However, the stunning redhead failed to notice Naruto's tiny smirk at her statement, which was quickly replaced by a frown as his purple, glowing eyes flashed brightly. Kushina, don't worry, Naruki, we'll be all right. She smiled when she heard those words because, even if he didn't mean to, they made her heart and soul swell with warmth and protection. She smiled even more when she heard those words again, and she returned the smile. She spoke softly, but he could clearly hear what she was saying. I know. After all, her father is coming to get her. Go get him, Naruto. Sama. TT Ibane, she said, raising his eyebrow in his mind. He decided to nod slightly instead of responding. Kushina then hurried to the castle with the intention of curing Akemi's severe injuries. Naruto took a breath, sensing she was gone, and then closed his eyes for a few seconds before he was suddenly engulfed in a swirling mass of pure darkness with sporadic black lightning streaks. Naruto's eyes closed as he sank into the whirling mass. but a purple aura of some kind was visible all over his body. He seemed to be directing something. If only heaven had anticipated. Time. Heaven in the present. As before, the Tengoku no Kuruseda Gundam headquarters, Heavenly Crusader Legion headquarters, was surrounded by a giant swirling black mass of darkness and lightning, which those in the court of Kami could see from the Palace of Divinity, just like all other residents in heaven. Shadowing most of heaven itself, black lightning surged the vast mass of darkness. Both soldiers and civilians gazed up at the enormous mass that exuded power and bloodlust in a way that was both amazing and terrifying. The tremendous pressure and yokai coming down like a storm caused some of the weak-willed angels to faint right where they were standing as they watched it spread farther and farther. Simply put, it was shocking, especially to the deities who were taken aback and shocked. This has never happened before in the history of beings with absolute power and control, because not a single demon from Makai had the ability to enter their realm directly and actually bring down such power that it brought the weaker ones to their knees. However, no one noticed Kami and Megami's slight grins as they both stared at the whirlpool cloud of darkness, which was both frightening and somewhat alluring. It gave them a faint chill, but why would the two supreme goddesses of life and death react in this way? It resulted from the fear of what lay ahead. Then, without any prior notice, a violet light appeared in the center of the whirling mass. It glowed lethal before abruptly taking off like a missile, capturing the attention of all the deities. As the violet comet of light descended upon the Crusader Legion, all they could do was stare. Before a single word could be spoken by anyone. Boom! As the shockwaves of the crash swept through the entire area around the headquarters, the frontal building exploded in a fiery blaze of hellfire from the sudden impact. The explosion even rocked the palace walls. Not only that, but the Crusaders of the aforementioned attacked legion were also set ablaze by the flames of hell itself. The building that exploded when struck soon exploded again, but this time a huge pillar of hellfire shot up into the heavens, darkening them even more. Wow, what the devil is Hellwing up to? Has that idiot gone completely insane? As he and his fellow deities gazed at the devastation that had just occurred in front of their very eyes, the shocked, flabbergasted deity Amatsu Mikaboshi spoke, his eyes as wide as possible. I concur. Has he really grown conceited enough to launch an offensive? Although I was aware of his stupidity, did he really have the gall to enter our domain and launch such an offensive against us? Another god, Ka-Jin, the god of fire, said, I say we get rid of this pest right now. Even though he is referred to as the god of fire, the goddess of the sun Amaterasu's flames are far more potent than his own, which could quickly reduce him to ashes. Megami rolled her eyes at what they said, but then she turned to face her sister and saw Kami, who had serene, divine azure blue eyes, gazing at the devastation in front of them. When she noticed other gods starting to give commands, she abruptly increased her power. Don't do anything. This is just a matter between Hellwing Naruto and the Crusader Legion. Right now, all I want is for our soldiers to encircle the outer walls of the Crusader HQ in case Hellwing attacks farther away. Aside from that, no one should provoke him or attack him in any way, Kami said, causing all of the gods to instantly freeze when she used her power spike. However, everyone except Megami was shocked by what she said. Tsukuyomi, who spoke first, said in a startled tone, but Kami. Sama. What he's doing is declaring war and attacking heaven directly. You can't imply that we'll let him go. When she finished speaking, Kami sighed. That may be the case, but you must all remember that one Hellwing has come here only to retrieve what was wrongfully taken from him. The second is that, as leader, Nora and the entire Crusader Legion have betrayed me. When someone acts in such a way against me, they are punished, but since this is their second offense, their punishment is death. Thirdly, as I previously stated, this is not a declaration of war. Hellwing is here to reclaim what was taken from him, and he has every right to do so with or without our help. She said this in a commanding tone that sent shivers down everyone's spines. With a covert smile, Megami acknowledged that her fellow sister's words were the whole truth and that she and Kami did not want to send their troops to Naruto for two reasons. First, they knew they would be killed easily, and second, they did not want to enrage him even more than they already were. She thought in her head, plus, we don't want him dead. That man is so interesting. Now that the gods were repeating what their leader had said, they abruptly stopped when something struck them. Did Raijin speak for all the other gods when he said, Kami, Sama, at least tell me. What exactly was taken from Hellwing for him to do such a act against us? What in the three realms could cause a devil of his size from Makai to ascend to heaven and cause so much devastation? I want to know what exactly was taken away from him in order to create so much chaos. Summarizing all of their ideas, he asked. A few people who looked into Kami's eyes flinched a lot as her angelic face unexpectedly changed into a more frowning expression as her eyes took on a glint of something like anger. Kami narrowed her eyes and waved her hand, creating a kind of spiritual window that revealed what was happening at the Crusader Legion headquarters. As she did so, she chose to respond to Raijin's query. That idiot Nora took Uzumaki Naruki from Hellwing and her mother after kidnapping her. Furthermore, since Hellwing first branded Uzumaki Kushina as her mother, that idiot has not only stolen Hellwing's slave, but also branded the young child with his mark. Additionally, she was branded from within Kushina's womb, granting her the same status as her mother. Furthermore, Nora Yuro, that idiota Yuro, took Hellwing's daughter, and to be honest, I don't blame him for his current actions. The Kami and Megami then ignored the completely stunned gods in front of them as they continued to watch. One could see the interest brimming in their eyes if they looked closely at the window that displayed what was happening at the moment. Leader of the Heaven. Crusader Legion inside the formerly renowned and revered headquarters of Heaven's most formidable military force, which is known throughout the three realms. A location that was once known for producing the most formidable crusaders ever. It was so highly regarded by the gods themselves that it became known as the most powerful academy for crusaders. The area was now in complete chaos and disorder, with the HQ on fire, the younger members running away in fear as the veterans charged into battle, and everyone else dishonored and stripped of their ranks. The skies above them had changed from their usual heavenly blue to a dark crimson with black streaks caused by the rising smoke from the burning bodies and the destroyed building. We discovered that the frontal building of the aforementioned headquarters was completely destroyed and had been replaced by a massive crater that was impossible to gauge in size. The flames of hell danced around the circular deformity in the ground at the crater's outer rim. As their skin and organs burned to ashes and their blood boiled to such high temperatures, the bodies of veteran crusaders lay on the ground, screaming and burning from bloody murder. Some were rolling around attempting to extinguish the unquenchable flames, while others were long dead, revealing only a skeleton consumed by hellfire. The cries caused the crusaders in the vicinity to recoil at the suffering of their comrade, but they all focused on what was happening in the center of this pit of death and devastation. As the smoke from the impact dissipated, the kneeling form of a Hellwing Naruto emerged from the crater, his form gradually rising. The devil slowly rose to his full height as the flames of hell circled around him as if in response to their master. He then looked up from the crater he was in and into the faces of the crusaders who were all around him. However, the first crusader, like many others who met the devil's gaze, began to shake uncontrollably when he saw his eyes through his spiny golden bangs. Since there was a demonic slit of some kind in both of his eyes that appeared to pierce the souls of everyone who gazed into his very demonic orbs, it was possible to see his demonic pair of violet pupil eyes, which were filled with nothing but a sinister violet shade that could only be characterized as the ultimate bloodlust. Naruto advanced slowly before uttering a single word that caused all of the crusaders to scatter and rush toward him like a herd of angry but desperate bulls. Die. Temple main crusader headquarters. An incalculable number of armed veteran crusaders could be seen in the main building as the sounds of screams and explosions shook every temple in the headquarters. There were so many people in the room that it was obvious they were all the aforementioned veteran crusaders. Everyone faced a massive threshold that was fixed to the walls, armed and prepared. Made of some sort of metal, it was 10 feet high and 10 feet wide, making it imposing and tall. However, it did appear impenetrable. The person who could be considered the leader of all the crusaders stood in the center of these innumerable crusaders. Kami's right hand and the captain of the Crusader Legion, a once recognized and renowned military force. One man, Nora, was standing with all of his weapons in his armor, and the other was holding Uzumaki Naruki's struggling child by the collar of her shirt. "You big jerk, you hurt Akemi. Chan. Let me go. When my mother arrives, you will be in serious trouble," Naruki, who was crying and struggling, yelled. Her tail waved wildly, and her kitsune ears flapped and twitched angrily. Despite her best efforts, she was unable to escape Nora's hold because his height and strength were far greater than hers. She did, however, feel the weird feeling that made her think she had experienced this feeling before, as well as the numerous explosions, screams, and tremors coming from outside this large location. And in some way, it kept her warm and protected, in contrast to the crusaders who were shivering in the armor. Because she perceived Naruto as the big meanie, she believed Kushina was pursuing her. The former honorary crusader leader, Nora, simply grunted, "You've been corrupted by that meddling little bastard Hellwing. And you're Kami, Sama's chosen one. I will not allow you to be forced into that unholy one's grasp and used as his weapon." Nora had claimed that the big meanie was agitating her, but Naruki had blinked in confusion at the man's words. However, he had not given her any training because it would have been fatal to her health and very existence. Even though she was a very young child, she wasn't stupid because she struggled with the two sayings until she finally realized something that made her frown. In Nora. Naruto told me that training me now would be too risky, but this jerk is lying. Nora. Taicho. The third barricade has been breached by He, a crusader, whose armor was broken and burned in many places, and whose wings appeared to have been torn off from additional burnings, yelled as he flew in through the ceiling. The obvious thing, though, was that his left arm appeared to have been ripped off entirely. When Nora and a few crusaders saw his injury, they frowned. When the man spoke, Naruki became alert, particularly when he used the pronoun he, rather than she. The thought of who was coming, if not her beloved Ka-chan, made her wonder. That is, until she felt something quickly approaching, causing her kitsune ears to twitch before abruptly perking up. Very quickly. The bewildered Naruki thought, who is that? And why does this familiar feeling come to me when I sense that something? But before anyone could say a word or do anything, Nora's eyes widened a little at what his soldiers had to say. Clang. The noise of metal bending and hammering echoed through the space. Everyone's gaze was soon drawn to the enormous threshold of a door that now bore the impression of some kind of fist. Even Naruki was concentrating on this with a modicum of wonder and a growing interest in the identity of the person behind that door. Clang. As the walls cracked with a constant boom from the metal giant door, another fist imprint struck the door, causing it to tremble and bend. Nora shouted abruptly, "He's coming, men, brandish your weapons. The chosen one will not be returned to the clutches of evil by this unholy creature." His yell reverberated throughout the space. Hora. As each crusader within the figurative sea of crusaders held out their preferred weapon, the sound of swords being drawn could be heard. Nora did the same when he directed his heavenly energy into his blade, causing it to be enveloped in a sort of white aura. Clang. 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 With 4 more imprints engraved inside, there were 4 more thunderous bangs on the enormous threshold. Each of them is causing it to change from being completely sealed off to being somewhat open. Everyone could now see that the middle door was slightly open to the outside world after the 4th clang. However, what came next rocked everyone to their core. However, Naruki was neither frightened nor frightened when she saw the same thing as the others. Rather, she was overcome with a feeling of warmth and familiarity that was so intense that it made her skin crawl. She was caught in a state of growing awe, so she didn't question the chill that made her smile for some reason she didn't understand. This split of the once impenetrable threshold was actually the darkened violet-slitted eyes of a very angry devil. The Crusaders and Nora believed they had protections, but in that 1 second alone, everything changed, and they now find themselves completely and totally exposed. Not right. Do you think I can be stopped by this small door? Stupid people? They were unprepared for what came next because the massive steel slabs that were beyond repair were suddenly blown open and off the walls from which they were hinged. Naturally, the doors flew straight into the Crusaders, and some of them were unlucky enough to be struck by the metal slabs, causing them to become nothing more than a smear of blood on the floor. The smoke from the doors being blown off began to clear as this was happening, and with it came the sound of footsteps. However, there was no sound other than this. Many Crusaders were still in shock over the death of their fellow Crusaders and the fact that their strongest door had just been blown away like nothing. The fact that they were smashed like a pumpkin instead of fighting their way to death. From a door. Despite everything, the small Naruki, who was restrained by the collar of her shirt, was staring at the shadowed figure as he approached. His footsteps somehow reverberated in the eerily quiet HQ temple area. Naruki's eyes widened and Norris narrowed in disgust and hatred as the smoke cleared and the shadowed figure became more and more visible. When the smoke had completely cleared, the figure of Hellwing Naruto appeared. He was walking calmly toward Nora and Naruki, his gaze solely focused on Naruki and unconcerned with the numerous armed crusaders in front of him. His evil eyes lingered on Naruki for a moment before focusing on Nora and displaying the complete iciness that only Naruto could muster. His hands were by his sides, and although his face remained expressionless, those who could see into his eyes would be able to see the icy rage hiding beneath his demonic, slitted face. He did not exhibit any signs of surprise as he approached Nora and the Crusaders more closely, but then 2 of them suddenly materialized at his sides, swinging their weapons. He showed no emotion at all, even when the blades were only an inch from his head. He disregarded Naruki's astonished and anxious expression or Nora's arrogant one, believing he was going to die. The 2 Crusaders were looking at Naruto's back in a state of shock and, oddly enough, disbelief when he suddenly appeared behind them and continued walking in the direction of Nora. Anguish. Then, a second later, both Crusaders' heads simply exploded in a bloody mess, with blood, bone, and brain matter splattering the air and then falling to the ground. Both of their headless bodies struck the floor dead as they slowly fell forward, leaving more blood on the ground. But Naruto didn't pause or shift his demonic gaze away from Nora's face without even looking. The devil only cared about his target and his target alone. He didn't give a damn about anyone else. Who had the audacity to take what was rightfully his? This stupid little fallen crusader will pay for his sin. He was going to get it back. And his death will be the price he pays. Naruto narrowed his violet, slitted eyes at Nora as he approached them. The crusader only saw Naruto's demonic violet, slitted gaze before an unfathomable twinge of pain erupted in his stomach. This was before something grabbed him by the face and began to tightly squeeze it, causing him to grunt in pain. As a result, Nora was blind, in contrast to everyone else who could see what was going on in front of them. Naruki was restrained in Naruto's free left arm, her eyes as wide as possible as he held her in a protective embrace. His aura dispelled any tension she may have had before she inadvertently snuggled closer to him. She sensed a warmth that made her feel even more secure from any danger that was out of his control. Her purple eyes were fixed on the scene in front of her, both in complete shock and growing awe. The big meanie, or scary man that she had seen standing tall and imposing, holding Nora by the face and slowly raising him up, was right in front of her. She saw that Naruto had not looked at her during this because his hair bangs were blocking his vision. To be honest, the child was attempting to come up with every reason why this man might be present. She would get her answer with his next move, though, because she saw Naruto lift the struggling Nora off the ground inch by agonizing inch before her very eyes. His fingers slowly dug into his face, causing Nora to scream, but his offender's palm muffled her voice. "You stupid little angel, do you think you'll get away with what you did to me? Coming into Makai and taking something that wasn't yours. You will not only die for stealing what was mine, but you will also die a death worthy of someone who believed they could kill me with a simple trap like this." Naruto said this in a tone that was incredibly composed but also had the underlying coldness of 1,000 glaciers. All he received in return was Nora's continued yelling, which his palm muffled. Despite this, he continued to tighten his hold on the crusader's face and forehead. He tightened his hold even more, making a noise. Break. As his forehead cracked under the tremendous pressure of Naruto's ever increasing iron grip, Nora let out a muffled, agonized scream of immense pain, and there was the sound of bone cracking. Blood began to slowly seep out of Nora's nose, eyes, and ears as well. Because of the tremendous pressure being placed on him, the blood that had accumulated in his head was attempting to escape. And it moved very slowly. MFFFHGGHGH. When Naruto tightened his grip, cracking and breaking most of his teeth, the muffled Nora tried to speak but ended up screaming even louder. However, he continued after Naruto finished speaking. "This is your demise, you pitiful piece of filth. You should pay for your actions against me and my slaves now because you took what was rightfully mine without considering the repercussions. Fuhai. Demon magic. Rot. Is Akuma Maha." Similar to its namesake, Naruto's hand abruptly covered Nora's body in a sickening deep brown hue that gradually seeped into Nora's body. He was struggling even more with an excruciating vigor when Nora's eyes suddenly snapped open, allowing his screams to be heard even through Naruto's hand. However, it was ineffective because his left arm abruptly fell off his shoulder and hit the ground, releasing a toxic green smoke from both the arm and the shoulder. His right arm then slid off without a hitch, and his hair literally fell out of his head as his eyeballs literally rolled out of their sockets. He was reduced to a decaying waist and torso after his legs had also fallen to the ground. When Naruto felt the blood of the dying angel he was holding pour into his palm and drip off his hand, he scowled in disgust. "Disgusting," he said, and then, with a single motion, he pushed the decaying angel away from him. He then pointed his palm in Nora's direction, causing it to crackle with black lightning before a ball of darkness appeared there. "Die. Worm," he said as the orb abruptly blasted out of his palm, sprang toward Nora, and exploded when it struck him, destroying him completely and destroying a few hundred crusaders in the process. They had no chance of surviving the orb of destruction and darkness that took them out of the temple walls. When Naruto saw the idiot dead, he slowly turned to face the crusaders who were now surrounded by him in shock and rage. The crusaders believed there was no way out for him and Naruki. Naruto slowly looked down at the young girl he was holding, and he acknowledged her when he saw her wide, startled purple eyes. "Child, hold on to me. For this is about to get very wild and very bloody real fast." The little devil, Kitsune hybrid, heard this and didn't waste any time in answering the question. She gripped him tightly and waited, watching for what would happen. As she followed instructions, Naruto turned his attention from her to the crusaders encircling him. Without hesitation, he unleashed his full power, bringing down the entire crusader temple and headquarters. As Naruto's form abruptly exploded, The fires of hell wrapped around him and the tendrils of pure sickening darkness waved around him, causing an intolerable pressure to crash down all of the Crusaders. Many people stumbled in shock as the ground cracked and the entire area began to tremble. The other divine legions had to hold their ground even outside of the attacked KQ because the ground beneath them began to shift uncontrollably. If one were to look up into the very skies of heaven, they would see that it was completely dark with the occasional flash of crimson and purple lightning. The main dominion of heaven seemed to have experienced an earthquake, and it seemed to be growing stronger by the second. The temple of the deities was the only secure location, and even it began to crumble gradually due to the power emanating. They all seemed to be on the verge of being crushed and carried away to their deaths by a damned monsoon. The deities from every realm could only look on in complete disbelief at what was taking place right in front of their eyes as they watched this within the palace. Yes, they were taken aback by the unexpected surge in power, but they were also surprised by how quickly it increased to levels they believed were unattainable, even for the renowned devil race of Makai. However, at that moment, before their eyes, Hellwing Naruto was seen standing there, murdering Nora, and holding the child that had been taken from him while the Makai elements of hellfire and darkness circled him as though he were their master. Those beneath him saw him as even more fearsome and fierce because of the way his golden, spiky hair seemed to move and sway in the tumultuous winds of his ungodly power. As his power grew stronger, even some of the lesser deities began to tremble. They never saw Kami's and Megami's excited eyes as they gazed upon Naruto's form through the spiritual window Kami had created, his power surpassing all the boundaries they believed were possible. The fact that he was a creature of such ancestry and strength that they were unaware of until now thrilled them both as they watched his power grow even more than they had previously believed was possible. The two goddesses found Hellwing Naruto to be a very fascinating creature, and they secretly wished to learn more about him than they already did. In fact, his growing power made the palace itself tremble, and if it hadn't been for them and the other gods inside, it would have most likely collapsed under the weight of Hellwing's power. They were all able to observe as Naruto's body began to glow in a combination of 3 colors. Dark violet, bloody crimson, and a void. Less shade black. It appeared as though the elements of hellfire and the tendrils of darkness were swirling around him, merging into a massive pillar. Did Naruto fail to notice the changes as he allowed himself to change into his true form as the pillar surrounded him and blended with the fires of hell and darkness? Even Megami, the goddess of death, was shocked by the form he used when Naruki was first born. The shape that will now rock heaven to its core and turn it into a place of utter chaos. He would be shocked by the changes in his form as he submerged himself in it, and the wide-eyed Naruki who watched him from inside the pillar of fire and darkness would be transformed by this experience in awe. Her eyes were sparkling as she saw the man who saved her life and made everything better change. She looked at him with the kind of look that only a child her age could give when they see something so fantastic. As Naruki watched the man who had held her transform before her very eyes into something that made her eyes widen with every second that went by, all she could think was, Whoa. As it blazed like a blazing torch in the darkest of nights, the enormous pillar of mixed energies was now visible to everyone in heaven, tearing through the destroyed temple and piercing the very skies. However, those who believed that the shaking would end or lessen were completely mistaken because it suddenly got worse when Naruto's power suddenly increased even further, creating a literal rip in the sky. When Kami and Megami felt Naruto's power surpass their expectations and reach levels that both thrilled them and unsettled their fellow gods, their eyes widened. That is, until the pillar emerging from it abruptly expanded inch by inch in the Crusader Legion of Heaven headquarters, destroying everything in its path. That is, until it abruptly stopped and descended into the destroyed temple. However, as they say, this was all the calm before the storm. And they were all okay. With a slight smile, Megami whispered to her sister, now Kami. Chan, watch, it's about to get real good. Kami's eyes were fixed on what was happening in front of her. We could discover the Crusaders encircling a crater created by the enormous pillar that had just moments before pierced the temple's very sky deep within its first floor. When they all peered inward, they noticed a shadowed figure in the smoke that was invisible. That is, until the smoke abruptly dissipated, exposing a transformed Hellwing Naruto. And by Izanagi himself, what a transformation he has experienced. They saw the fully changed man who had destroyed more than half of their veterans on the night of Naruki's birth standing in the crater that caused every single crusader on that floor to tremble in unadulterated terror. This time, they were able to witness changes in him that made many people with weak wills drop to their knees in fear. It made sense because, right before their eyes, the same 7-foot, pitch black, Hellwing Naruto appeared in his full, powerful form. All that was visible were the changes that had not existed all those years ago. His golden violet, Tipped hair was now visible cascading down his back in a wild, spiky mane. In addition to his demonic claws being more defined than before, as well as the spikes protruding from his elbows and kneecaps, his demonic armor overall had even more spikes sticking out. They both glinted in the little light that was visible and were a foot long. That wasn't all. His demonic helmet also appeared to have partially fused with his face because his demonic glowing eyes appeared to be stronger than before. This was a power that had long been thought to be gone, and ancient appeared to glow in his eyes as it blended with his now cold fury. What really frightened most of the Crusaders and unsettled most of the observing deities, however, was the lower portion of the helmet. Because Naruto's mouth opened in a slight grin and revealed his enormous, razor-sharp maw of green fangs, it appeared as though his jaw and teeth blended with the helmet, giving him an even more terrifying appearance. Each tooth was a massive fang capable of tearing and tearing through everything. The smoke emanating from his mouth and nostrils was even more unsettling. Then Naruto's last modifications, which included both his wings and tail, appeared as he emerged. Should I say tails instead? For the time being, his once 6-foot demonic tail has been replaced by a tail that resembles the other scales, spikes, and sand, but is now 7 feet long. His black angel wings were on his back, and beneath them were another pair. These wings were the same color and shape as the first pair, but they were all 14 feet long, so they extended outward and touched the ends of his artificial crater. The demonic force of power and bloodlust slowly glanced down as he took another step, oblivious to everyone else. The wide-eyed Naruki, her light purple orbs meeting dark violet slits, was once again staring back into his eyes as he held her firmly but protectively in his left arm. That was before Naruki noticed something in his eyes that gave her the utmost consolation that a parent could provide. No. A father might offer his child. She embraced the warmth he somehow emanated, which gradually filled her entire being, and abruptly tucked herself closer to him, ignoring his icy, metallized body. Naruki let out a small mewl and muttered something that Naruto heard but did not reply to. Papa. After giving the child a quick glance and closing his eyes, Naruto began to slowly rise off the ground and emerge from the crater. When he arrived at the level area, Crusaders gave him a wide berth before encircling his demonic form once more. As he held the little hybrid child in his arms, he ignored everyone else and stared at the child. He felt a sensation rise inside of him. He had no idea what that was, and it caused him to frown inside his helmet. That was before 5 naive Crusaders swiftly surrounded him, 2 of them swinging their blades at him and the other 3 chanting spells to blast him. In a flash of silver, those 5 Crusaders lost their heads, but Naruto's eyes first widened before narrowing. Naruto stood there with his right arm extended, holding his trademark blood-forged no dashi, but this time, like himself, his weapon changed as the sound of decapitated angels fell to the ground. The guard changed from a demon's maw to 4 devil horns pointing in opposite directions from one another, but otherwise it appeared exactly the same. The demonic red runes inside appeared to have melted and blended with his obsidian blade, giving it a bloody crimson hue, and a scale of some kind moved somewhat up the blade. His Nodashi's pommel was spiked as well. The chain was still there, but it was only 2 feet long, with an odd sort of demonic horned skull hanging at the end. As its empty eye sockets appeared to glow red like a kind of twinkling flicker, a tiny smile appeared on its face. His recently modified blade was 8 feet long, increasing its destructive power and range. Naruto gave a slight nod of approval as he looked at his newly modified blade before slowly turning to face his enemies. His tone conveyed the depth of this enraged devil's rage as he gripped Mokushiroku, Apocalypse, and caused it to burst forth with the fires of hell and darkness enveloping it. For upsetting me and stealing my child, you little brats will pay the price. Experience the fury of an angry Akuma, and in a split second, Naruto vanished, only to be followed by a horde of several hundred Crusaders. All of those Crusaders, however, burst into several spouts of blood, gore, flesh, and bone in that one instant. Their organs flew through the air and hit the ground, along with several Crusaders' dead bodies. However, he didn't stop there. Naruto reared back and then appeared in front of several hundred more Crusaders after channeling hellfire and darkness into his blade. He launched his attack with his blade blazing with a mixture of darkness and hellfire. After swinging it after the merging of a dark shade of violet, Jigoku Pyasa, Hell Piercer, and without a second's warning, a giant blade like attack erupted from Naruto's blade, destroying every Crusader in its path. Afterward, before uttering the words, Ya, Kato, melting cut, Naruto channeled hellfire into his blade, causing it to erupt as though it were alive. As the name suggests, the attack was successful when he teleported behind a group of charging Crusaders, as the fires of amplified hell melted them instantly as they fell to the ground. Before launching his next attack, Naruto looked over his shoulder and pointed his blade at a group of angry crusaders, aiming the sharpened point of his blade directly at them. Then, as the element of darkness enveloped his obsidian blade, he said, "Yami no Hakai," darkness destruction, and a highly concentrated beam of darkness shot off from Apocalypse before striking the crusaders. Boom! Along with half of their once honored, now ruined temple, the group of crusaders simply walked to their deaths in a blaze of death and destruction. The attack's huge hole revealed that half of the temple had been destroyed, along with the crusaders who were within striking distance. Naruki's purple eyes were fixed on Naruto's form as he battled and killed everyone in his path, but Naruto never saw them as he continued to attack them, ignoring their cries for mercy. She was unaffected by the widespread death and blood around her. On the contrary, she was growing accustomed to it and found it oddly thrilling to witness such things. But from what she was witnessing now, attacks, battles, and the slaughter of everyone in his path, she realized that Naruto was far more powerful than anyone had previously believed after seeing him swing his newly modified blade. Naruki could only smile broadly as she looked at him, then nuzzle his body while letting a few tears fall from her eyes. She spoke with a joyful smile, oblivious to the fight and death going on around her. "Oto-sama," she said. Unaware of Naruki's warning, Naruto severed the head of a crusader before turning to face a swarm of them. He then threw his blade at them, gripping it like a spear. 10 of them were thus stabbed through before they struck the wall, which was stabbed through like a shish kebab. Naruto then used his free hand to channel darkness before turning to face the crusaders, who numbered over 10,000, before he spoke. "Kurayami no Bora," darkness volley. Suddenly, orbs of darkness shot out of Naruto's free hand, each striking the crusaders. This caused multiple explosions, which further rocked the temple as more of its main walls were destroyed and part of its roof collapsed. Naruki's eyes widened as a shadow suddenly materialized over him, and she closed them while yelling to Naruto, "Papa, in your rear." Naruto turned around after hearing her scream, but what he saw caused his eyes to flare with rage. A crusader had thrown a spell at him. Most of it missed him, but some of it did hit him. More precisely, it only scratched Naruki, but the sight of her pain and bleeding sent his senses into overdrive. He bared his teeth and turned to face the sweating, apprehensive crusader. Before he could react, Naruto was on him, his free hand clamped down on his neck like a vice. He opened his enormous maw of teeth and snarled at the idiot before chomping down on the crusader's head. Without hesitation, he jerked the crusader's head violently in a variety of directions with a violent shake of his own head. That is, until one last tug. Rip before throwing the man's severed head into the air, Naruto opened his jaw even further, causing the head to fall straight into his mouth before he closed it. Did the crusader's head fall off, causing blood to spurt everywhere? Crunch. Blood trickled down Naruto's mouth as he chewed on the head, then allowed a large gulp to swallow the chewed-up head down before frowning. There was a loud crunch of bone breaking, flesh tearing, and blood spurting as his devil mawful fangs crushed the head inside his mouth. He spit out an eyeball of the crusader after saying, "Meh, orcs' heads taste better." He disregarded the horrified, disgusted looks from the other crusaders as he was doing it, as well as Naruki's shocked, yet excited, expression when she saw what he had just done. She thought that was the most amazing thing she had ever seen, second only to him murdering and mutilating the cruel people in their immediate vicinity. Naruto looked down at Naruki's wound, which had closed up because of her healing regeneration and his overwhelming presence, which destroyed the holy power in the wound. He spat out his teeth and the remaining bone. He spoke in a demonic tone while extending his hand outward and glaring at the remaining crusaders through his helmet. "Biguban Hakai Yami no Bakuden, Big Bang Destruction Darkness Bomb," means, "This is the end for you all. Die knowing this wouldn't have happened had you not followed your foolish leader." He gathers darkness in the palm of his hand before blasting it forward, causing a large explosion. A huge explosion. He called his blade back in his mind, causing it to vanish and then reappear in his hand as he saw the other ones gone, either destroyed by the attack or something burning alive. Then disappeared from his grasp, and he moved Naruki slightly in his evil metal arms before glaring and slowly looking in a certain direction. "I know you're watching, Kami. Let this serve as a warning. If anything and I mean anything like this occurs again, I'll return and make it seem like a piece of cake once I've dealt with the next person who has irritated me. Till then, keep an eye on yourself, deities." After that, Naruto released his transformation, allowing himself to be engulfed in a pillar of hellfire and darkness before it vanished, revealing him in his original form. Nothing had changed, but the power emanating from him was stronger than ever. He then moved Naruki slightly in his arms as he passed through a dark portal that was closing in on him. The court of Kami in heaven. In the court of Kami, there was only silence as all the gods watched Naruto, the devil of Makai, obliterate the once honorable Crusader Legion into nothing more than a number of corpses, leaving the main headquarters in utter ruin. While Kami and Megami suppressed a smile at what had just transpired in front of them, every deity was still in shock over what had happened. All they could do was continue to keep an eye on Hellwing going forward and ensure that their soldiers were kept under stricter control in case this incident occurred again. They were so excited that they would have smiled if it weren't for the tense situation, but they couldn't help but shiver when they thought back to Naruto's last message to them. His imposing violet-slitted eyes were glaring at them from inside his devil form's demonic helmet. Kami and Megami had the same thoughts. Hellwing Naruto, you just keep blowing every expectation I see for you. You're such an interesting being that we both can't hope to see grow further and further. Castle Makai. Hellwing. When Naruto emerged from the dark portal, he was carrying the soundly sleeping Naruki in his left arm. His face remained expressionless, but when he looked down at the sleeping child, his eyes had a slightly satisfied expression. Holding the child felt strange because he was a devil who was so powerful, cold, and hateful that it was practically unimaginable for him to be doing so. The feeling of alienness caused him to frown a little, but he knew all too well that he should have held the rushing signatures down. For now, you've got your back, Naruto. Sama. When he looked up, he saw Mito, Kushina, and the recently healed Akemi standing in front of him. Was the collective yell of three females. He glanced at the three of them and then nodded slightly, but not before Naruki made a tiny sound that caused Kushina to look up at him with wide eyes. When he saw this, he gave her Naruki gradually. There you go, Kushina, the child is safe, he said as the redhead beauty embraced her child. Her shoulders trembled and her eyes filled with sparkling tears before she gave her child a slow embrace. Her tiny baby girl. Unaware of the suffix change, she said, Thank you. Thank you so much Naruto-kun. When she stood up and kissed his cheek before heading back to the castle to put her little girl to bed, she did something that caused Akemi and Mito's eyes to widen and Naruto to stand in mild surprise. Both Mito and Akemi stood staring at the scene in disbelief, Mito more so than Naruto, who simply stood there with his eyes as wide as possible. That is, before she silently grinned at the action and hoped her master would approve of it. She grasped Akemi and they both bowed before making their way back to the castle. As he stood there, Naruto slowly placed his hand where Kushina had kissed his cheek, just before he scowled in bewilderment as the emotions he had experienced at the time returned with full force. This caused him to scowl even more before he literally trampled on them once more, smothering these emotions inside of him. He took a step forward and sighed as he looked at his castle. Why do I think the years ahead will be so busy? He didn't know. 7 years later since Naruki was abducted and Naruto rescued her after destroying one of Heaven's legionary forces, a total of 7 years have gone by in Makai. With a few exceptions, everything has returned to normal since then. Naturally, Naruto returned to training the three women, Akemi, Kushina, and Mito. Since then, Naruto has taken care to increase the three girls' training distances in order to strengthen them every day. And it worked. The three women gained significant strength from his techniques through blood, sweat, and tears. Each of them demonstrated growth in their respective areas of strength and weakness. He instructed them to strengthen their areas of weakness so that the enemy would not be aware of them. The former Biju, Akemi, has improved more than anyone else, despite Naruto's rigorous training regimen in the weeks long training trips he took each girl on. During her journey, Naruto put her through a second hell in which she had to battle demons that were either as powerful as the first Jubi or, in rare instances, more powerful than them. Though she didn't escape unscathed, she repeatedly demonstrated her ability to defeat every demon, demonstrating that each battle was difficult and that some of them brought her dangerously close to death. However, she became wiser and stronger for herself as well as her fighting skills with each battle. However, by training harder and longer, she was able to gain strength, surpassing the first Jubi from long ago. However, she nearly died in one instance if her master hadn't intervened in time. Akemi had grown somewhat closer to the man who had given her another chance ever since this incident, to the point where she would confess to having feelings for the devil. Despite her fear of admitting them, she was caught red-handed by both Kushina and Mito, who, to her surprise, welcomed her and supported her during her period of self-depression. He took the girls on trips that lasted for weeks at a time, and each time he took one, he made the other two train harder than they had ever done. He had the two girls prove themselves to him, and if it was either Kushina or Mito, he had them raid and destroy one of Lucifer's or Yami's fortresses as part of their training, destroying each fortress's leader as well as them. This worked in two ways. The first was by training both Uzumakis in the most extreme circumstances, which involved fighting a one-man army of powerful demons and destroying their main stronghold. The second was that it postponed the expansion of Lucifer and Yami's territories, and the fact that both of them suffered significant losses made it even more delightful. For the past 7 years, Naruto has put the three women through everything and back, strengthening them and improving their reflexes and abilities. They were going through all of this because Naruto wanted them to be able to protect themselves from any demon. Another noteworthy event was that they became even more chaotic when Makai learned that Naruto had acquired a daughter and another slave. The harassment of both Mito and Kushina worsened, and although Akemi's treatment in Makai was not as severe as Naruki's in Ningenkai, it was still harsh because she was a Biju and they had a reputation that had long embarrassed Makai. At one point, a demon named Ragnori rode to Naruto, expressing his personal resentment of the first Jubi for killing his mate, children, and mate. Ragnori also harbored a deep hatred for the Jubi and Biju as a whole. Thus, this demon lord had stated that he would give Akemi 6 of his finest slaves and several books of forbidden spells if he turned him over. Normally, if Naruto had been the same person from his past, he would have just accepted the demon's silence, but instead he took an action. In order to give Ragnori a very unpleasant surprise, he had Akemi, who was terrified after reading the letter, place a few forbidden kitsune curses upon it. Because he was willing to keep her despite her past as a former Biju and now kitsune demon, this action further confirmed Akemi's belief that she had fallen in love with him. When this incident occurred, her love and affection for him increased so much that she had to use all of her strength to resist kissing him for keeping her. Instead, she simply suppressed the urge and gave him a huge smile and thank you, to which he simply waved her away. There have been other events over the past 7 years, such as the death of the Crusaders and the destruction of their headquarters, which led to a change in power that even Naruto felt had risen to a level that shocked him. It was so strong that he had to train even more to keep his newly discovered power under control and avoid going insane from bloodlust. Out of everything, however, one thing has changed the most. Uzumaki Naruki, a young child who was only 5 years old, has grown into a healthy young hybrid girl who is now 12 years old. The once helpless young girl developed into a preteen who took all instruction very seriously over the course of the previous 7 years. Yes, that is accurate. Naruto kept his word and trained her when she turned 12, but not in the same way that he did for Mito, Kushina, or Akemi, for that matter. She was still too young to receive the same training that he provides to the older women because, given her age, the training would destroy her. In order to prepare her for the training he would provide her in the upcoming years, he started her on a gradual and easy regimen. This is so she can begin to master her physical skills and control her Yukai. In other words, improving her strength, speed, reflexes, and senses as much as she could on her own. However, over the course of the 7 years, Uzumaki remained the same vivacious young child that her mother and the other 2 members of her surrogate family, Akemi.ne, Chan and Mito.oba, Chan, all adored. However, her relationship with Naruto has changed significantly since he saved her from the Crusaders, and she now views him completely differently. Makai now believes that Naruki is crucial to Hellwing because of this new light, which is why he did something so startling. He was her father, her papa, and she loved him just as much as her beautiful Ka, Chan. Her cherished Oto. Sama was viewed by her as both her master and father, but primarily as a father. She would naturally view him as such because he had raised her and kept her safe over the years. She was so devoted to him and loved him completely that she took her training very seriously and impressed him in ways that only a bright child could imagine. As the adopted daughter of Hellwing Naruto, the supreme devil of Makai and the strongest demon titan in history, she gained some notoriety as a result. Due to her stunning appearance and her heritage as the first ever Kitsune devil hybrid, she was sought after by demons worldwide. But throughout it all, Naruki rejected them, beating each and every one of those lust-filled demons into the ground before killing them to further demonstrate her disdain for any of them. She did this, and one day after she had beaten up some of these demons, her surrogate father gave her a very uncommon sign of affection at Euro. A pat on the head. This might seem like a typical father-child relationship, but to Naruki, it was much more. Much more. For a father and his child, what was considered a typical expression of affection was like being on cloud 9. Because when he puts his hand on her head, she freezes before she can express the indescribable emotions. The 12-year-old let out a little moan as his touch filled her with warmth and her very soul. Additional indications would be her kitsune ears and tails stiffening at his touch, followed by the shocking release of pheromones from her very being when she recalled a particularly passionate moment with her beloved papa. However, Naruto would release his hand before it could go any farther, causing her to whimper in need and despair at losing his incredibly warm touch. When she saw him staring at her predicament after she was caught, she would have naturally blushed darkly and wished she could just crawl into a hole and die there. As you can see, little Naruki, Chan and her father had a very interesting relationship. Naturally, this elevated Naruto even further in Makai since he had not only acquired a slave from Akemi, the strongest Biju, but also a daughter of everything. As a result, other demons gave him more political shit. It didn't matter, but it irritated him so much that he would visit that demon's home and immediately destroy them for simply bothering him. However, there have been mental events that Naruto has concealed from everyone because he wasn't sure what they were, but he was gradually coming to the conclusion that they had something to do with spending time with all of the women in his life. But aside from this, not much has changed, so we go on to our favorite devil and band of demons in a specific small location in Makai. Makai Circles. 9th Circle. Treachery. Could we locate our group of 5 in the final circle of hell, known as Treachery, deep within the fabled Jigoku no Sakura. Circles of Hell. They had reached this conclusion because Naruto had paid for a personal expedition for his own use as well as a training trip. Since this was a new experience for the 12-year-old Naruki and a training trip for the 3 women, they didn't question him. Early on, they had entered the circles of Makai, and ever since, they had been moving through it with the lethal trio of Mito, Kushina, and Akemi, who battled guardians and demonic creatures that gave them all a hard time while they were still fighting together. They battled demons and guardians that Naruto alone had either explained to them or had only heard about in legend. Agramon, the demon of fear, and nightmares, the living embodiment of fear, are examples of demons. Another legendary demon who is said to have participated in the Second War against Heaven is Alistair, the executioner of sinners. The third demon they had battled was the guardian of the 7th Circle, also known as Amdusius the Destroyer. The 3 women nearly lost their lives in the battle with this demon, but they defeated him, leaving them completely worn out and seriously wounded. They expressed their gratitude to their healing regeneration for its assistance. However, things became extremely chaotic once they reached the 9th and final circle, because they were led by Hellwing Naruto, who was blissfully oblivious to everyone around him. That was the final circle of hell, even though he was being pursued by 3 stunning demons and his alleged daughter, who was by his side constantly scanning her surroundings. Apart from a few minor adjustments, the 4 other Naruki haven't changed all that much. For example, Kushina's outfit has changed to more closely resemble Mito's, with a battle-made kimono that fits her body perfectly. As she walked closely alongside Naruto, she displayed her ideal hourglass figure, wide hips, and DD bust, which she held in her right hand in a reverse grip. Kushina had grown even more devoted to Naruto over the previous 7 years, to the extent that she now gave him more frequent little hugs, and the infrequent peck on the cheek. However, aside from the time he saved Naruki, that has only occurred twice. She slowly looked at him and smiled a little, contentedly, as a shade of pink rose to her cheeks as she saw his figure. One of the things she loved most about him was his charming stature, which always flowed out of him like a raging river. The Mito next to her, who had looked at her sister as intently as her adored master, was also grinning. She has benefited from the 7 years since she and Kushina have, in a sense, become closer to their master than they have ever been. Neither Kushina nor she knew how, but he appeared a little more forthcoming than he had ever been when they first met him. Naturally, he was still the devil who, at the mention of his name, caused all of Makai to tremble and shake, his very presence instilling the deepest fear in the hearts of all Makai residents. Naturally, she and Kushina still had their moments, but they were infrequent and occurred only when they needed a way to let out their pent-up emotions, particularly when things got really out of control. Regarding Akemi, who walked next to Naruki, she would occasionally glance at him before turning away because there was a flushed reddish tint to her cheeks that only happened when she was near him. She was ecstatic to know that she had occasionally won his approval, particularly after he had twice saved her life. One from the letter from Ragnaros, and the other from the training trip. She hadn't changed much either, aside from the fact that she was wearing a kimono similar to Kushina's, which was designed for close combat because that was her style. It appeared as though Kushina hugged her goddess-like body, revealing her flawlessly shaped hips and butt while her kimono revealed a tiny bit of cleavage on her DD bust. Her long, crimson red hair fell over his shoulders in 2 big bangs, touching her buttocks. Due to her healthy diet, Uzumaki Naruki, the youngest member of the group, had changed the most physically. She was now a normal height for her age, standing at a good 5 feet 2. Her eyes resembled those of her beloved papa, but she had her mother's healthy pale complexion. Her hair, now longer than before, had golden strands inside and fell below her lower back, just like her mother's. Finally, Her developing low C-cup bust was visible, followed by her heart-shaped face with tiny baby fat. And quick for her age, too. Since she preferred to fight face.to face, she felt it was more appropriate to dress more like her father than her mother. She therefore wore a nearly identical outfit to Naruto's, with the exception that hers was primarily red and had the Uzumaki swirl embroidered on the back of her cloak. As she began learning the fundamentals of Kenjutsu, she also carried a katana strapped to her left hip. She wore a tight black t-shirt that fit her like a second skin across her torso. She was wearing black boots of some kind on her feet, which were actually weight clothing that Naruto had given her as part of her training. Enough said. Naruto narrowed his eyes when he sensed something ahead as the group continued to travel farther into the end of the treacherous circle of Makai. However, this was actually two Yukai signatures, one of which he was already familiar with. However, he wasn't entirely certain about the other one because, although it initially resembled Yami's, it wasn't. Who is this other individual? Makai. Treachery. Final floor, 9th circle. Hellwing and his group were finally able to enter the 9th circle of Makai's last floor. And many of the women's faces were filled with both wonder and curiosity at what they saw. Spiraling upward from within the endless column of ice, they were surrounded by glaciers of some kind on the walls, and inside these glaciers were living people who were completely nude from the moment of their birth, letting out a painful, silent scream as their bodies revealed themselves to be blue, purple, or even black due to the extreme cold they were experiencing inside the enormous glaciers. While Naruki and the other women looked around, Naruto was looking directly at something that had captured his attention. In fact, it was a prison cell in the circle, which is renowned for its ice-based self-made prison. He was curious to find out more about what was inside because he could sense the energy from earlier. But when he slowly looked down and saw a pair of green eyes staring back at him, he scowled. The ice in front of them began to slowly crack and break apart as a giant entity slowly rose up from beneath the enormous crystallized ice sphere. He grunted to get the attention of the other females. Naruki and the other 3 females were looking up at what appeared to be a 50-foot tall serpentine. Like demon with a giant demon skull on its head and live snakes for his hair. This caused Naruki to look up in mild awe. His enormous fists were visible as his 6 limbs clenched and unclenched. The demon's Yukai appeared to pulse from him as its green glowing eyes looked down on them all. Hellwing. Why on earth are you here, of all places, Yami? Sama, said the enormous snake demon. However, Naruto simply stared up at him in boredom before turning to face the prison cage behind the enormous demon. As he spoke, he took a step forward and didn't look at the demon who was staring at him as though he were the most fascinating thing in Makai. As calmly as ever, he said, "That is of no concern for you, Astaroth. I'm only here for something of personal value, and it would be in your best interest to get out of our way." But without missing a beat, Naruto halted when a massive fist slammed down in front of him, causing the surrounding area to tremble wildly. He caught a glimpse of a pair of green-slitted eyes staring back at him as he slowly glanced at the demon that was blocking his way. "Oh, that's not possible, Hellwing. Unless it was Yami. Sama, nobody else is permitted past me. If they are, they must either leave or perish at my hands." The giant snake demon clenched his 6 fists, causing his arms to bulge in muscle and girth. "My master Yami gave me the task of preventing anyone from going past this point. As Lucifer's former top general and Yama Sama's 3rd strongest commander, I will not allow anyone to pass by me," he said. Mito, Kushina, and Akemi all broke out in a little nervous sweat as his Yukai appeared to burst from him. If Naruto hadn't been standing in front of her, effortlessly fending off the Yukai pulse, Naruki would have suffered the consequences. It merely caused his hair to slightly billow, if anything. Naruto sighed as he looked absently at the battle. Ready demon and then slowly at the prison cage, feeling the power inside gradually rising and then falling. First things first, Astaroth. What's in that cage? Or why, given that the glaciers themselves serve as its prisons, would a cage be located in Makai's final circle? He asked inquisitively, not wanting to acknowledge it just yet. The demon whose name was being called, Astaroth, slowly turned its head in the direction of the prison and gave his Yukai a slightly more intense glare. "You inquire about something that has been kept under wraps and is essentially referred to as a rumor in Makai. Since no cell in this circle can house the creature that Yami Sama himself created in that prison cell, he wants it to remain imprisoned here. The only thing keeping that person inside is that cell," the demon guardian said, "because in that cell is the rumored bastard child of Yami Sama himself. If that really answers your question, Hellwing." Naruto's eyes appeared to glint with an intriguing flicker as he gazed at the cage behind Astaroth, and his eyes did widen a little at the news. He was aware of the supposed child of Makai's Yami god. The child, like himself, is a unique combination of devil and god. He was somewhat intrigued by what was inside that cell, but he had more pressing issues to deal with at the moment. He slowly looked up to see the gleaming fragment of metal around Astaroth's enormous neck. It resembled a skull medallion, but it was completely black, with 2 violet gems set in its eye sockets. He smirked abruptly before continuing, allowing his Yukai to slightly spike. "I'm sorry, Astaroth, but I'm not in the mood for games. Stay back, Mito, Kushina, and Akemi. You've accomplished enough for today." When he said, "And you Naruki go to your mother." All 4 of them nodded, and the Naruki obeyed his order without question. Naruto glanced back at Astaroth after this was finished. Then he glared a little, his purple eyes changing to a more violet one that seemed to exude an overwhelming power. As he watched Astaroth slither swiftly at him and throw a meteor-sized punch infused with Yukai that had enough power to level half of Ningenkai itself, Naruto channeled his power outward and smiled slightly. Boom! Inside the prison cell, the final circle's very foundations shook as the sound of an overwhelming explosion rang true. From inside the dark prison cell came the rattling sound of the ice prison's broken or cracked chains. Another explosion caused a figure inside this prison cell to twitch. The person's gender and face were hidden from view due to the darkness surrounding their body. However, a pair of pale aqua-colored eyes slowly opened when the third explosion occurred. They displayed the rushing emotions of betrayal, confusion, and overwhelming hatred as well as vengeful anger. They looked languidly around the prison that had housed the inmates for so long. When the enormous guardian demon Astaroth fell directly in front of the prisoner's cage, the person's eyes widened a little as they looked out at the so-called frozen hell. The demon's head was the only thing missing. "What? As the person's eyes met the once invincible guardian, a harsh, dry, and surprisingly feminine voice spoke from within. The dead demon in front of the prison has the inmate's eyes wide open. And then there was the sound of footsteps. Naruto was seen holding the medallion in his hand while standing in front of Astaroth's severed head. After staring at it for just a moment, he put it in his pocket for the time being. He was a little bored after witnessing Astaroth killed by a strategically placed darkness-made blade. He therefore went to the prison that housed Yami's infamous bastard child in order to quench his boredom and his ever-increasing curiosity. The group of girls who were a little taken aback followed him closely. In Naruki's case, they ran up to his side and gazed at the prison in bewilderment. As he approached the prison, Naruto took a slow look inside and saw a shadowed figure, but he was unable to identify it due to the metal cage that the Yukai were blocking. A pair of pale aqua-blue eyes, however, were staring back into his own purple ones. For some strange reason, the other was filled with a great deal of shock and suspicion, while his own was filled with impassiveness and a hint of interest. "So, you're the supposed offspring of that mighty Yami, huh?" Naruto spoke without considering whether he had offended the person in front of him. The sight of the prisoner's eyes blazing up in wrathful anger at the mere mention of the god of Mikai's name gave him the pleasant assurance that this child of Yami's loved him. That idiot isn't powerful at all. He is merely a traitor to his own family and a liar. Naruto arched an eyebrow at the icy tone the speaker used, which was full of resentment and coldness that only he could display when he was genuinely irritated. "I'd rather see him die by my hand than care for his pitiful traitorous ass." Before Naruto looked back into the prison, his purple eyes staring back into pale aqua ones, he muttered, I see. So there's more to this than the rumors say." Even though he gazed into the eyes of Yami's alleged legendary child, one of his worst adversaries, he felt no need to kill this person or simply lock the prisoner up. If anything, he experienced a strong desire to truly let go of the person inside of him. He was rapidly growing accustomed to this urge. He raised an eyebrow as he looked into the eyes of Yami's bastard child, seeing the emotions there as clearly as day. "Do you wish to be freed?" For the tiniest of moments, Naruto saw a glimmer of hope at his words as he asked. It was such a wonderful feeling to consider leaving the prison at last. However, there was always a cost. "I do, but what would you expect in exchange for the payment?" As usual, the voice was icy and inquisitive. Naruto simply leaned forward and grasped the prison's cage, remaining unresponsive to the question. "Do you really believe that I'm looking for anything tangible from you?" Since his suspicion that Yami had at least a child was confirmed, he said, "I don't really care that much. All I really want from you is information about Yami other than that it's up to you on what you want to do when you have attained your freedom." After a few seconds, he received the response he was waiting for. "Information? On my dad? All I know about him is that he wasn't a close combat specialist back then, so that's his weakness if it will do him any harm. Because of his general lack of physical strength, Yami is terrified to engage in close combat, despite the rumors and legends. His long-range attacks from the elements of hellfire and darkness as well as the deity spells that gave him fruit as a deity, are what give him power. Before he locked me up in this desolate prison, that is all I knew. Raising an eyebrow in response, Naruto closed his eyes and mentally relived the information that had been presented to him. When he was younger, he was initially told that Yami was a versatile fighter, which helped him become proficient in all types of fighting. However, he was certain that this new knowledge would give him a slight advantage over the gods of Makai and darkness in his fight against Yami, which was certain to occur. Very well, thank you for the information. I know you do not lie because I can sense the honesty in every word you spoke, Naruto said, slowly opening his eyes after a few tense seconds before grabbing the prison's cage and ignoring the Yukai blocking offensive spells. With a brief display of his ungodly strength, Naruto tore off the cage's door as if it were nothing and threw it away from him and his group, creating a reverberating clang of steel hitting ice. I can see that you clearly despise Yami, just as much as I do, though probably not as much. Naruto took a step forward and pulled a lever to his right, loosening the prisoner's chains and lowering him to the ground just before the loud noise of the restraints being released. Click. Soon after, the sound of slow, tiny footsteps could be heard as the shadowed figure approached Naruto, who was accompanied by Kushina and Mito Akemi. Naruki was at his other side, watching him with interest. The appearance of the shackled prisoner inside was created when the light from the outside, which had been blocked by the door for so long, finally made its way inside. And it was quite a sight for everyone to see when the individual entered the new light. Naruto grinned lightly at what he saw. The child of Yami, who had been so enigmatic up until this point, was actually a woman because the gender was kept a secret and has been tightly guarded. And what a lovely, fascinating woman she was. For there was a woman in front of him who was so beautiful that she maintained her goddess-like figure despite years and years of incarceration. In a sense, the woman's flawless hourglass figure and good height of 5 feet 7 inches made her seem almost divine. Her rosy pink lips briefly displayed an almost permanent frown, and her fair, slightly pink skin tone gave birth to a natural sheen in the light. Her long, somewhat spiky pink hair, which hung past her shoulder blades and had 2 more bangs that hung over her shoulder, was what made her stand out the most. Her hair naturally flowed and spiked in a way that went somewhat to her mid-back. She wore a crimson turtleneck style shirt underneath a form-fitting, sleeveless, midnight black overcoat. Her DD.cup bust appeared restrained but still identifiable. There was a metal pauldron on her left shoulder, completely black with violet striations. Oddly, the pauldron resembled a piece of armor from Naruto's own devil form. From the pauldron that sparked very faintly, spikes protruded. She wore black fingerless gloves with metal knuckle placements on her left arm, and the same glove on her right arm, with a red ribbon of some kind tied around her right arm. She wore a crimson miniskirt underneath, which exposed her perfectly toned legs and left an underlying teasing visage. Her more distinctive look was enhanced by her knee-high black combat boots with crimson metal spikes strapped over them. Last but not least, a kind of red cape was strapped to her left side. It had no symbolic meaning other than the fact that Yami's army's mark was crossed out, signifying the woman's history with the deity's army was forever lost. Finally, a 5-foot long black leather case was fastened behind her waist and down to her right. A metal handle of some kind was visible, and it gleamed in the light, just like the woman's long, pink hair. Naruto could see from the woman's appearance that she radiated the same kind of energy as he did, given that she was a well-known hybrid of a demon and a god. This new realization made him laugh in his head. It was a really intriguing idea, but it was also ironic. Even though the devil race has always been the deity's worst enemies, seeing a cross between the two in the person he saw now made him wonder if Makai was a deity. However, it has been suggested that the idiot is somewhat insane. For the moment, he ignored those thoughts as he looked at the woman in front of him. He could see that his slaves were taken aback by her appearance, or in Naruki's case, in awe of the presence of such a beautiful woman. The woman's appearance was so unusual, even he had to acknowledge it. However, he was more drawn to the woman's strength and attitude than to her general looks. He was unaware, however, that the woman was also examining him. Her gaze followed his features. What she saw was a handsome male, the kind that is extremely uncommon in the realm of Makai, where there are demons of such a repulsive nature that only a handsome one can be found. However, what she actually noticed were the man's distinctive markings, which confirmed her suspicions about who was in front of her. Even while she was imprisoned, she was constantly receiving news from Astaroth, which gave her so much. And she was pleased with what she saw. The strength emanating from this man was sufficient to make her wonder if he was more powerful than her own father, Yami, as it continued to increase in strength by the moment. Despite the fact that she was half of the same race and he was a full-blooded devil, she could sense that they were the same. Although she was aware of her immense power, Naruto's power made her own seem insignificant in comparison. It was like drawing a comparison between a lion and a deer. She was oddly excited by the thought that there was absolutely no match. Did it stem from the allure of discovering someone who could completely destroy you with such ease? She was unaware, but for the time being, she will only honor the man from Makai's legends. My greatest of respects for freeing me despite the information I gave you, she said, lowering herself slowly to her knees and bowing her head. This is the most someone has ever done for me. You have earned my enduring respect and loyalty by rescuing me from the eternal prison my father had placed me in. To you, Hellwing Naruto, the renowned supreme devil of Makai and the strongest demon titan, I hereby swear my allegiance to you forever, as my mother taught me before she passed away, she said in her usual icy tone, but with dignity and respect for the person she was addressing. When Naruto heard this, he arched an eyebrow because he hadn't anticipated anything like this, especially from the child of Lucifer, his second most hateful adversary. However, the woman harbors a deep-seated animosity toward her father, and he was able to sense her strength, which, although insignificant in comparison to his own, was still something to be ashamed of. If anything, it's on par with Kushina and Mito's level. Interesting. He eyed the woman who was kneeling in front of him for a few seconds before he sighed. The woman slowly stood back up to his request before nodding subtly. I see, then get up, for if honor does compel you to do this, then I shall not stop you. All I will say is that if you truly are wanting this, then you are welcome to do so, but do tell me the name of my new ally. With a slight smile that seemed to brighten her face even more, she said, I am very grateful that you accepted. As for my name, it has been so long that I have nearly forgotten it. My alias would be Lightning, but the name my mother gave me would be Claire. Nightwing Claire. As a result, Naruto and his team have gained yet another crucial ally in their battle against Lucifer and Yami. But if only Naruto had a real idea of how much Claire would mean to him later on. If only he were aware. The bedroom at Hellwing Castle in Naruto. The group of 5, now 6, returned to Hellwing Castle and provided Claire with a place to stay since she had nowhere else to go. It took some time for them to return, but once they did, they positioned themselves and had the girls furnish Claire's own room in the enormous castle. Even Naruto was taken aback by how quickly the girls had grown attached to Claire. In fact, Naruki was referring to her as Light.Ne. If you can believe that. As soon as Naruki began to take to her, Mito, Kushina, and Akemi did the same. It made sense because it took 4 days to return to the castle from the Makai circles. In just 4 days, even the frigid lightning had warmed up to the 4 girls, particularly Naruki. The lively preteen was a tiny, vivacious thing that, despite its diminutive size, always brought a smile to her face. She felt as though the new life she was given had given her a new little sister. However, in just those 4 days, the woman was able to see that her new ally and, more importantly, leader, was a strange man but a strong, trustworthy person of whom she was absolutely certain. She was genuinely shocked to learn of his most recent acts against heaven itself, Lucifer, and Yami. It was just plain crazy to hear that this man, with whom she had allied herself, had fought and rebelled against every potential Makai supernova and attacked one of heaven's most powerful legionary forces, even though they had provoked him. Still, it's impressive. With every action he had taken in the past that Mito or Kushina told her about, her respect for him increased exponentially. However, what she truly respected was that he wasn't a lust-driven individual like many others in Makai. She was impressed that he was surrounded by so many attractive women and not glaring at them like a crazy dog. Since Mito and Kushina, who oddly shared a bed with Naruto, are also currently sleeping in their beds, we can find them both in Naruto's room. During the past 7 years, he has occasionally seen them sleeping close to his body or, more extreme, embracing themselves to his body when he first wakes up, though not in a romantic physical sense. He was sweating and his eyes were clenched as he kept moving his head back and forth. His hands were gripping the sheets so tightly that they were almost tearing them while he dreamed. Or, given his behavior, was it in some way a nightmare? As several voices of women, ranging in age from young girls to children, passed him by, we could see Naruto gripping and clutching his head in some sort of pain in the depths of his mind. His mind caused the ground beneath his feet to crater and change shape as he struck it. Naruto grunted a little in discomfort as he tried to ignore the voices in his head. Look, Naruto. Sama. Look. I succeeded, a young girl's voice said. A big grin split her face as she looked at him with such glee only a child could give. Her long purple hair framed her innocent face. What? Naruto.kun, if you wait, I'll catch up to you. I'll be the best apprentice you've ever had. The young girl, who appeared to be about Naruki's age, spoke in an older voice that was identical to hers. with a joyful smile adorning her face. The girl's sharp ruby orbs looked up at him. No. It can't be. Naru.kun. I wish this would all end, but as you have taught me, war in Makai and the other two realms never ends. No matter how much you want the disease to simply go away, it never does. However, Lucifer's plan is more sinister than anything, and unless something is done, it will eventually tear Makai apart. According to the same girl, who is about 18 years old, her face is heart-shaped and devoid of any baby fat, making it appealing to everyone. Her long, flowing purple hair and her narrow, delicate ruby gems perfectly frame her face, giving her a more serene, divine appearance. Before repeatedly slamming his fist into the floor, creating a crater that grew larger and larger each time, Naruto's eyes snapped open upon seeing this additional memory. The same woman's voice spoke at that time, but this time it was something different. The same woman slowly materialized in front of his kneeling position, but this time she was genuinely staring at him with tears of love and sorrow streaming down her cheeks. There was a look of pleading fear on her face. Her words reverberated in his ears, as soft as silk and as gentle as the gentlest breeze. Help, please, help me, Naru.koi. Naruto was unable to lose it. From the depths of his mind, he let out a roar of agonized outrage. Then, on the outside, Naruto's eyes snapped open, and he quickly stood up. He mumbled as he gripped his face with his hand and his eyes were wide as his shoulders shook and nervous sweat trickled down his face and head. Are you phoning for me, Mia?
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.